Okay, we should be live. Okay. Well, then I'll just wait for everybody to, Oh, I'm not that late. Calm down. Pedro, you should definitely be used to people being late, considering who we watch on a regular basis. But I'll wait for a few more people to trickle on in, and then we'll just enjoy the nice December afternoon hours. All right. Well, it has been one hell of a day and one hell of a year. I'm calm, just memeing. Well, sometimes just memeing is the way to get through the day nowadays, now isn't it? But yeah, it's been oh, hello Saffron. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I have most of your stickers actually lined up on the wall of my PC now. It's a tradition I've been doing since college. I usually put like my I voted stickers, but now I have all these Anglo Pepes and it's quite enjoyable. But yeah, it's been one hell of a day news-wise, hasn't it? We've got our NDAA veto. We've got Trump calling in for $2,000 in checks. It has just been a wild ride these last, 24 hours, haven't they? And I get to enjoy yet another year on the Earth. Thank you very much. Thanks, Bullfrog. I appreciate it. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the fact that it's another day. It doesn't feel all that special to me, although I appreciate the warm words. It's always been that way growing up since it's so close to Christmas. But in fact, I think for me it just makes it yeah, I'm all for non-political chat questions. In fact, I am all for not actually talking about politics at all. We can definitely just chill out and talk about whatever. Because I had found some things that were definitely interesting that I thought about bringing up that were totally not related to politics at all. I had found this rant from Camille Paglia. It's from the Chicago Humanities Festival. And she goes on this long rant about why the ending of Revenge of the Sith is one of the greatest things ever. And I think I'm going to link it into the chat so you all can enjoy, because that is a trip. So let me put that in chat. Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it. We're just enjoying a nice, cool, and relaxing stream. Avoiding politics for a little bit. I still wanted to put something out there and enjoy just company with all of you guys. And yeah, I agree. Packley is great. I love it because anytime that she gets to go on a rant about something, it's not even a rant because she's not really angry. She's just really passionate and an incredibly intelligent woman. I've been reading her for years. She's definitely someone that everyone should be reading and listening to. But yeah, Pedro, if you have any questions, by all means, go for it. I'm all ears for questions. Well, with that in mind, I am enjoying a nice warm day where I'm at. I can't believe that it's near Christmas time and it's still 70 some odd degrees where I'm at, which is insane. But then again, I live in Texas, so winter weather isn't necessarily something that I can expect. But that's fine. I've enjoyed my fair share of actual white Christmases when I lived overseas as a kid, so I guess this is my comeuppance for enjoying European snowy winters as a kid, and now it's dry and windy Texas winters. But that's okay. I am incredibly lucky for everything that's taken place this year, so I really can't complain. Life is has its ups and downs, but since moving, I can definitely say that life is doing its best for me despite everything that's happened. And I should probably tell people that we're live. Let me go put that on Twitter. Okay, that's done. All right, Pedro says, what's a better origin for fantasy, vampires, monster version, Twilight is cringe, immortality potion gone wrong, a demonic curse, or created through a necromancy ritual? For me, I've always been a classic fan of man pushes the boundaries of science too far, so I'd have to go with an immortality potion gone wrong. Demonic curse is probably a close second, and then third through necromancy ritual. I think those two kind of go hand in hand. It just depends on what kind of world building that you have. So if you want maybe a more modern sort of steampunk kind of setting, or something that just sort of talks about like the feasibility of a vampire existing, I think the idea of immortality potion going wrong is always great because man's hubris of messing with technology is always something that we can talk about. It just reminds me of like Paul Virilio and the integral accident. Demonic curse, if we're working in a framework of angels and demons, then definitely applicable. And necromancy ritual, again, it just depends on what kind of world building that we're setting up with. So like if it's a world where vampires exist and we've got other kinds of monsters and creatures, I'm all for the latter two. But if it's just straight vampires and only vampires, then I'm always going to go with the man's hubris going wrong. I don't remember any snowy Christmases in the 2010s, and I live in Poland. And I lived in Germany in the early 2010s, and a little bit beforehand, I had snowy Christmases. It's a shame that you didn't, though, Conrad. I definitely remember growing up and having snowy Christmases. And Vampire the Masquerade origin story for vampires is based AF. Yes, it is. Vampire the Masquerade's origin story is definitely one hell of a tale. If you are unfamiliar with it, I highly recommend getting into it. The lore is great, although I'm not looking forward to their sequel that they have for Bloodlines. I just, after everything that VTM has gone through in the last like 5 years and going woke, I have no desire to see what dumpster fire comes out of their second game, if it even gets released. But yeah, the fact that it kind of goes back all the way to Cain and Abel, definitely one hell of an origin story. Plus, you have the masquerade itself. It's just such a cool concept. Vampires, I think, are definitely underrated as a medium in fiction, especially when we're talking about horror, the undead. The zombie trope has definitely been beaten to the ground, although it's kind of seeing a resurgence, mainly when like K-dramas and action shows that we're seeing out of the Koreas. Maybe that's just because I've been perusing through Netflix lately, and they've got all sorts of zombie related shows that are coming out of Korea and China. So I don't know, but I think vampires are just tragically underrated. And the only thing right now that I can see that's vampire related is what We Do in the Shadows, right? Taika Waititi's TV show based off the classic film. That's all I know that's been going on with vampires. But then again, I really do not watch a lot of... I don't read enough Harlequins if you think vampires are underrated. That's true. I don't. I do not read a lot of Harlequins, and I don't read a lot of pulps, and that's my fault. I have tragically not been a fiction reader for a very long time. And it's quite a shame because I did a lot of speech and debate in high school and college, and so like I just my entire reading list became straight up nothing but nonfiction, theory, histories, and fiction has just been delegated to like the classics of the Western canon. So I don't take a lot of time to read a lot of high fantasy or Harlequins or pulps, and that's a shame on my part. I need to make time for it. Twilight and Vampire Diaries killed them in the fantasy genre. Well, my counter to that would be like True Blood, but even then, I mean, that had its run. I would love to see it come back. I know that they did Bram Stoker's Dracula again on Netflix and the BBC, but while they attempted to be close to the original novel from Bram Stoker, they just took quite a few liberties, or at least a lot of more contrived writing, in my opinion. Hello, Dragonite lovers. It's good to see you. And yeah, preservatism, the Paglia clip is a pretty good argument. And for me, it's just like, yes, confirmation bias from one of my favorite intellectuals, because growing up in the 2000s, I was definitely a prequels kid. So as trashy as the dialogue and some of the CGI has aged, I don't care. I love the prequels, and I'm an unashamed Star Wars fan, except I can't forgive what Disney has done in the last couple of years. But on the comment of Harlequins, then, Conrad, do you have any to recommend? I would love to take the time to actually read some while I'm at dialysis, and I can just give you my thoughts then on Twitter. There is a Polish series about a group of vampires trying to survive in the Polish People's Republic, with things like one main character being so long in the workforce it could bankrupt the pension fund. Oh, now that would make for a fun story. Like, a vampire has been in the workforce for like 75 plus years, if not longer, and just single-handedly crashes the state's economy because the pension system, like we already see that in real life, right? Where pension liabilities are bankrupting cities like Chicago, Detroit, and San Francisco. I would love to see something like that play out in fiction. What's the name of it? I would love to read that. That sounds interesting. Do you think Tinkerbell ruined fairies and made us forget what horrifying monsters they are? Yes, because Disney has this wonderful ability to transform gritty and cruel fiction stories and just make them the exact opposite. So, like, yeah, Tinkerbell definitely ruined fairies in the same way that it took away, Tinkerbell's actual character from the books. It took away Grimm's fairy tales understanding of how we knew fairies, as well as the common Western European understanding of them. But I mean, Disney has done that for a lot of cruel and heart-breaking stories, like Hunchback of Notre Dame, for example. Like, the actual Victor Hugo novel is so dark and depressing, but we have to have this happy story where, everyone, wins out in the end. Claude Frollo, meets his fiery death, and Esmeralda somehow lives. So, I mean, we definitely have Disney to blame for ruining a lot of the original cruelty of classic stories that we see coming out of Europe. And all right, Conrad, I will definitely look that up and give it a read. And I will let you know my thoughts about it after I'm finished reading it. I'll probably do a little thread about that on Twitter. Because to me, that just sounds really interesting about bankrupting pension fund. Ugh. But yeah, so what's everyone's plans for the new year? I know that the classic trope of, well, what are your New Year's resolutions? He also wrote a name I cannot pronounce because unfortunately I'm not Polish. Saga about an alcoholic bum who does exorcisms as a side hustle. Well, I'm gonna just Control-C that saga, and we'll look that up later. Is it going to be a white Christmas where you're at? Unfortunately, no. I have not had really any snow where I live. I live in the middle of North Texas, very rural area. No snow for me. It's been very windy. And for the last week and a half, it's been like 73 degrees Fahrenheit consistently until the sun drops. So no white Christmas for me, but that's quite all right. As I had said earlier in stream, I've had the pleasure of having several white Christmases when I lived overseas as a kid. So things aren't so bad. I'm just happy that my health is as good as it can be, despite everything that's happened this year. I've got my family close by, so I'm incredibly blessed. I'm taking what I can into stock, and I won't complain. But what about you guys? Are you guys experiencing any white Christmases this year? Enjoying what's going on? Just relaxing? Hopefully, no one's really locked down so you can be with your friends and family for the holidays. I cannot believe that Boris Johnson did what he did to shut down pretty much the entire country right before Christmas after saying just 2 weeks ago that canceling Christmas would be considered inhumane. I have family in the Weatherford region. Well, I'm a little ways away from there, but I've definitely driven through Weatherford. I know that that's cattle country for sure. I remember in high school driving to Amarillo for a speech competition, and we drove through Weatherford and just the lovely smell of just millions of cows and then just seeing where they would eventually be slaughtered. You kind of don't forget that. New Year's resolution is to write at least 200 plus words a day, be that notes, brainstorming, or actual book passages. Now, that's a great resolution. That's awesome. Are you planning on writing a book, Pedro? What's it about? I'm genuinely curious now. Almost got 2 feet of snow this week. Wow. Yeah. I'm kind of jealous that you guys are getting snow. I certainly miss it. When growing up and living in Germany as a kid, and you're enjoying the winter wonderland and the Christmas markets, I definitely miss it because I went from overseas in Germany to the deserts of El Paso, and now I live in sort of this farmland rural area in North Texas. So snow is something I desperately miss. In Poland, we have 3 seasons: gray, green, and orange. Gray being over half the year. Uh, Gray being half the year in terms of like it just being rainy and sludgy, or is this more of ice, cold, and just bitterness? And at least you have 3 seasons in Poland. Where I lived in El Paso, you had 2 seasons. You had summer and then not so hot summer, where the wind would come in and the smog from the maquiladoras over in Juarez would come over and cover the mountains so you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. So those were my seasons, just blistering 110-degree Fahrenheit dry heat, and then slightly less dry heat with dirt in the air to where you can't see or really breathe. Unfortunately, though, Poland was one of the few countries I didn't get to see because we traveled almost every chance that we could. My father had a side hustle besides his military career, so we could do vacations and travel around Europe and see other countries. And unfortunately, Eastern Europe was not something that we got to go to, but it is on my agenda as an adult now to travel across Poland and Hungary for sure. Bare trees, gray skies, -0 degrees Celsius. Ooh. Well, that sounds commiserating, Conrad. I'm not going to lie. That sounds kind of miserable, but I'm sure there's an eerie beauty to it. Got to find the silver lining somehow. And then Pedro says, right now I'm writing a book about a fantasy war. I have 45 pages so far. I'm expanding those 45 pages into actual proper chapters. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad that you're writing a book and you're doing something productive. That's really great. I'm happy for you. Is it just 45 pages, or do you also have like your backstory, your notes, your concepts for world building? Because I mean, fantasy is always hard to get right because once you sit down and establish your rules for how the magic or whatever you have in mind for your story is going to be, you got to follow through with it. So hopefully you've got that listed out, because the best fantasy out there is usually those who like write the rules that they and stick with it. Because to me, once you know how to write it and work within the confines that you set up for yourself, whoo boy, do you have a fantastic setting for great fiction and high fantasy. And preservatism, almost 2 feet of snow this week. I actually don't know where you live. I follow your tweets pretty regularly. I just don't know where you're at. I would imagine the Northeast if you're getting 2 feet of snow, somewhere on the East Coast, New England area. But, even whether or not you have snow or not, it's nice that we can all kind of take a breather and a break from what's going on in the political world, because everything seems to be moving at breakneck speeds, or at least that's what Twitter seems to do. I have a boatload of world building. The worlds have been evolving since high school. Decided to actually write something. I said, oh, that's nice. At least you've had it in your mind for quite a while then. That's pretty good then. So at least you've got what it takes to make it work. Upstate New York. Oof. Yeah, I can imagine that 2 feet of snow would be something that you see then on a pretty regular basis come wintertime. Oh, I do have to ask though, preservatism, what's it like living in upstate New York knowing that most of your politics is dominated by New York City? I can't imagine how frustrating that is. Pedro says, I'm 22, so like 4 years of world building. Hey, that's not bad. 4 years of world building gives you a lot to work with. That's probably more than quite a few other high fantasy writers do nowadays, especially now. But I can relate. I just turned 25 today, so don't worry about your age. You can get a lot of things done no matter what the age is. Just make sure that you don't put your life on hold unless you absolutely have to. Google Minoan armor. Okay, we'll do that. The stream of time. Okay. Huh. Well, these are certainly interesting. Here, let me see if I can screen share that with you. New York City is cancer. Most people up here, even the libs, want to secede. It doesn't surprise me in the slightest. So, from what I'm reading, though, it seems that Minoan armor has this very interesting Egyptian feel, despite them referring to the Neolithic Cretans and a few Aegean sites. As of course, those also found in Anatolia, which is Turkey. This is some neat stuff. And incredibly complex for the time, considering this is Bronze Age technology. Wow. I collect flags. I just picked up the 10th Texas Cavalry Regimental flag. How'd you get into that, Great White Lobster? That sounds like a really unique hobby or collection to get into. Most people usually go for coins or something a little more vanilla, but that's definitely a strong piece of military history. Is it just like military flags, or is it also other kinds of vexillology, so state flags and country flags? And Conrad, I just read this whole blog spot from the Stream of Time about Minoan armor. That's really cool. Robert Freed says, I absolutely loved your video on the slippery slope of gay marriage. I showed it to some new atheist shitwit who was complaining about how Christians are homophobic. Well, and see, the problem I have with even the word homophobia, right, is just interesting, because fear is not something I think that they have. I think it's more so concern from the order of how things are. And the video goes into detail that many religious conservatives had a valid point to be concerned when, especially, the logic used to justify one thing will be used to justify things that have several degrees of separation. And it just sort of validates sort of reducto absurdum claims, as I had discussed with a friend of the Distributist on Twitter the other day. Conrad says, imagine having a full plate when people in Finland were banging rocks together. Yeah, I mean, it just comes to show how access to resources, as well as, of course, being close to the ancient civilizations of the time, can definitely accelerate your technological advances. I mean, you're close to the Aegean Sea, you're close to the Mediterranean, you're close to the Nile. All this technology of the time definitely is going to be vastly different than, say, something was happening in Finland at the same time frame. Just access to civilization and, higher density populations, people settle down. Yeah, it definitely is a vastly different kind of world. Rural New York is really red and poor, very demoralizing being captured by the Blue Empire. It's funny how many Confederate flags you find up here. I find that funny that someone would be driving through like Utica and there's just a bunch of stars and bars because they're pretty much living under Governor Cuomo and Bill de Blasio's rule. People see drag queens in school and deny slippery slopes. I think it's mainly just due to fear. I think that there's the acknowledgement that, like, hey man, in 5 years we went from it's just getting married, love is love, to drag queen story hour and having drag queens in elementary schools. And no one wants to acknowledge the crazy amounts of accelerationism that we've gone under in the last 5 years since the legalization of gay marriage in the United States. It's insane. I care more about the U.S. election more than whole Polish politics. Well, why is that? I'm just curious, because my understanding is that Poland is in this really unique spot to sort of strike back, at least culturally, against the EU. You have the Law and Justice Party that's been in power for 5 years now, at least. It's interesting, in my perspective, to see that you're having this cultural and political strike back against the more Western parts of Europe coming out of Poland and Hungary and parts of Austria. Great White Lobster says, got into it because of how many flags Texas had in the beginning, later in the Confederate States of America. I like flags that are tied to my heritage. Flags are ancient memes. Okay, yeah, I would agree. Flags are definitely ancient memes. I think there's actually memes on flags from, I think it's either the 100 or the 30 Years' War, where it was like, come out ye cuckolds, and it was from the English. So yeah, they're definitely ancient memes. And yeah, Texas has had quite a few flags. It's kind of where we get the whole 6 flags over Texas meme from our amusement parks. And Conrad, you told me it's boring. The Law and Justice Party has will, but not ability. So they don't act on anything. It's mainly more of they do things locally, but then they don't do anything. Also, Zoomers are carbon copy of US Zoomers for the most part. Yeah, that is unfortunately one of the worst parts of America's cultural exports, is our cultural hegemony over the Zoomers. Academic Agent did like a really good video talking about Zoomers. I don't really identify with them. I get them, but I don't understand everything that they do. They just feel so atomized and hyper individual, where the only uniting thing that they have sort of is this weird online meme culture and vernacular. So the things like yikes or the big oofs and the memes out there that you see on Twitter, or even the more surrealist stuff on TikTok, that's definitely an American cultural export. And when we saw over the summer all these Black Lives Matter protesters in places like Poland and places like Austria that are just like 99% white, it's just like, yep, this is definitely American Zoomer activist culture being exported abroad, and that's the American empire for you. It used to be something kind of better. Eastern Europe needs to protect itself from the cancer that is the Mick world and Americanization. Oh, yeah. Talking about M-word and over 99% white population. I assume the M-word is migration. That's what I would assume. We started calling SJW young women Yulkas to bash them for applying U.S. leftism to Poland without any thought. Oh, and you know that it's U.S. leftism because when they protest or they make any sort of statements and organize online, it's always in perfect American English. It's never in their native language. It's just, to me, that is the greatest sign that you have been indoctrinated into a belief that is antithetical to your own country and to your own, personal values and beliefs. And yeah, the Mick world and Americanization. Ah, okay, that word. Gotcha. Understood. You learn. See, you're giving me a Polish language lesson that I greatly appreciate. So if I ever decide to start browsing around Polish right-wing Twitter, I know exactly what words I need to say. But yeah, I'm with you there, Robert. Eastern Europe does need to protect itself from the cancer that is McWorld and Americanization. Ironically enough, it kind of has that bulwark in its religiosity. Eastern Europe is far more religious than its Western counterparts, which I think adds this really great cultural cohesion to sort of strike back against whatever the U.S. government and its cultural exports put out. It's Yulka because the most popular name at the time of this generation. Born as Julia, and every time you see someone talking shit, it's Julia. So is Yulka or Julia? That's sort of the Polish equivalent of a Karen? Just a really annoying leftist Zoomer. Pedro, I'm probably a weird type of Zoomer because I'm more of a bookworm. And there's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with being a bookworm, and there's nothing wrong with having a great library. Embrace esoteric knowledge, read old books, don't trust anything published after 1950. Poland has the fastest declining religiosity in the EU, if not the world. That is incredibly depressing to see that decline in real time, because as your Romanian neighbor V would point out to you that even though he's not religious, he likes religious people because it keeps the commies away. And I wholeheartedly agree. I went from a place that was incredibly secular and urban to where I'm now rural and much more religious, and you can definitely tell that no one likes dealing with leftists, especially in religious communities. Great White Lobster, the Hussars were some hard bastards. Absolutely. The Winged Hussars are a great thing to look up to if you're ever interested in military history. Karen is, I'm definitely going to butcher all these Polish words. Karen is Grancia, and more pro-welfare housewife who thinks she pays no taxes. But isn't that the great conundrum of all housewives that advocate for more welfare, or at least more government spending? Is that they think that they don't pay anything because they're housewives, when ironically being a housewife is only allowed because the tax rate's low enough for you to enjoy not having to work and contribute. It's just, to me, it's always interesting when you see sort of that motherly empathy being used to convince women to vote against their own interests. Sorry, women, if you're listening, but it's definitely true. Politicians definitely take advantage of that empathy feeling. Robert Freed says BLM flags over embassies in South Korea and Japan. If that isn't astroturfed, I don't know what is. Oh, no, it definitely is astroturfed, and it is a cultural projection. It's just the United States is sort of the originator of globo homo, and we have to project that out. And I don't think it's going to work in places like Japan or South Korea, just because of how overly patriarchal they are, when they've got worse, gender income inequality than we do, which we really don't have here in the United States. But when it's compared, at least, to other countries to be the worst, then, I mean, there's no way that that's going to be bought out. It will take a very long time for Japan and South Korea's population to accept that kind of stuff. I have voted for the Confederacy in the last election for the Peace and Justice Party to have less seats. Well, is this the Confederacy? Is that a different sort of party? Well, I'd imagine it's a different party, but is it a more right-leaning party, left-leaning, center? I'm not familiar enough with Polish politics. I am familiar with the Peace and Justice Party, but that would be about it. Although I would love to sit down and do a deep dive and learn more. Robert Freed says, I pay attention to Mongolia issues, although I'm not Mongolian. Lately, Americanization has really affected the country. It's tragic to see traditional Mongolian nomadic culture be undermined by globalism. Yeah, it's definitely depressing. I agree. One of the sort of downsides, I think, of any empire is that you're going to export culture, and then that means most likely the erasure of other cultures in pursuit of empire, which is the downside of really any empire historically, is always the erasure of other civilizations and stories. Libs, nationalist monarchists. Wow. Okay, cool. That always is interesting to see the republicanism versus monarchism debate come up. It's usually sort of explicitly for the United Kingdom, but wow. I didn't know that there was a party in Poland that wanted to bring back a monarchy. That's really interesting. I'm going to have to do some reading now. The Confederacy is everything right of the Peace and Justice Party. Okay. Gotcha. By the way, Pedro says, if you read my book and see how dark it is, just know that I'm not some nihilistic asshole. Fiction tends to be the opposite of how the author usually is. Yeah, I mean, most works of fiction are a way to express beliefs, attitudes, and ideas that we either can't express in public or um, just gives us an opportunity to really flesh out what we think. I mean, some of the greater pieces of fiction, I think, were written by individuals that were expressing things that weren't necessarily their own beliefs, like Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wrote Crime and Punishment, while was criticizing sort of the responses to the French Revolution. His work really comes off in a very reactionary kind of view, which for his time, Dostoevsky was not a reactionary. He was a progressive of his time. So don't worry. I will, if I ever get a chance to read it, and I hope it comes out, then I won't judge. Conrad goes on, a few of their members are monarchists. Party line is harsher than the Peace and Justice Party on social issues, with a mix of protectionism and liberalization. Well, one of these days, Conrad, I'm going to have to get you on stream so we can just talk about Polish politics and I can pick your brain. Because now I'm going to, probably when we get off stream later today, I'm definitely going to be reading about Polish political parties and the internal politics of your country, because this all sounds interesting. Robert Freed asks, do you think we are in the late stage of the American empire and nation? See, this is the problem, because growing up, right, in a military household, I have this like deep-seated nationalist attitude of this rah-rah pro-Americanism. And so the question becomes, you have a choice where you deal with sort of this managed and predictable decline into this, middle of the road country like France and England were after the Second World War, which I think you kind of saw out of the Obama administration, as you sort of saw this reserved leadership that sort of meant America was pulling away from some of its obligations, historically speaking, in the traditional liberal world order. And I think that is indicative of what we're seeing if Biden gets into office, is this sort of managed decline. And of course they want managed decline, because when you are the global reserve currency and we're still operating under the Bretton Woods system and the United States is sort of the dominant force of how the global economy works, that's where we're at. And whether or not we're in the late stage of it as a nation or even as an empire, if you want to call it that, I don't think we are. Not yet. It will get far worse once you see other nations understand that the U.S. is willing to decline and is willing to challenge it strategically, economically, and politically. And as I said on my live stream 2 weeks ago with David Carlson, that the U.S. is a hard power country that is now dealing with soft power threats like the Chinese. So once that happens, and the Chinese and its allies get a little more brazen in their actions to challenge American hegemony, then you're definitely going to be seeing the late stage. We're not there yet, but we are close. Bring back the glory of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. I don't want to be a serf. Anarcho-monarchism, though, we had courts by you had to execute the ruling by yourself. Oh man. Oh. All right, Conrad. Yeah, we're definitely gonna have to schedule some sort of Polish history and politics stream. This sounds so good. Great White Lobster says, what do you think about the Holy Roman Empire? Do you see similarities between the Holy Roman Empire and early America, then later the Confederate States? To be honest, I would have to do more reading on the Holy Roman Empire. I do know that the HRE was sort of meant to be like many medieval and Renaissance era empires, was sort of meant to be this idealistic inheritors of Rome. And we saw that all the way up to like Mussolini. Do you see similarities between the Holy Roman Empire and early America, then later CSA? From what limited knowledge I have of the Holy Roman Empire, not necessarily. If we were going to say that the United States is the inheritors of the great, Anglo United Kingdom, Great British Empire, if that was sort of the cultural mantra coming out of, say, our Manifest Destiny time period, maybe we can have a comparable comparison, but I'd have to do more reading to give you a more accurate answer. As for the CSA, you could argue that maybe there's some similarities there, but I think that you would really just have to delve into the reasons as to why the Confederacy seceded in the first place, which is entirely different from the formation of the Holy Roman Empire. Look, credentialist, all I'm saying is that there will be a great bunch of cities that have unique and great customs to them, and a lot of them will be destroyed by orcs. That's fine with me, man. I'm all for a good conquest and a good pillaging read. I like it when action and combat takes place, especially if it's over like a grand strategy type deal where we lay out the campaign and you tell me what's going on. Robert Freed says, with the massive decline of American patriotism in younger generations, how will the U.S. government staff the military? The same way that they've been doing for the last 25 years or so. So benefits mainly, the GI Bill. As long as America does not socialize a great majority of its public institutions like university and its healthcare system, the military will definitely rely on providing essentially socialized kickbacks for its service members. But also, The Economist a few years ago talked about the American military and discussed that a majority of its warfighters, so those who actually engage in combat operations overseas, come from these long line of military families. And they are predominantly white, have an immigrant background, usually from the 1800s, and they have served in America's conflicts, usually since the Civil War. And those will still continue. Unfortunately, our reliance on them will probably come to an end as the birth rates decrease. But staffing the military you will see some Roman level end of the Roman Empire levels of just recruiting individuals who have no care in the world. So immigrant families, inner city youth joining the military. I mean, recruiters already visit those places now. And while they may not serve frontline combat jobs, they will definitely serve administrative and post jobs inside the armed forces, and you will definitely see a decrease in unit cohesion. Pedro says, I need to make the setting for my next book essentially post-Civil War South Sudan. Now, that's a great sort of framing to take it in. Especially if you know anything about how South Sudan became independent and the ongoing conflicts essentially over oil fields and resources in the area between North and South Sudan. It is one hell of a way to make a story setting. Conrad says PLC had a law called infamy that stated anyone who brought you to the court could clean themselves of any crimes they committed. It served as a mean to prevent bandit bands from forming. Huh. Well, interesting. Infamy. Let's look that up. Let me go look that up now. That'll be something I'm definitely going to do research on. But yeah, I'm going to be doing so much reading now about Poland. I'm excited. Fair enough. I was getting more the governing structure. The HRE was not wholly Roman nor an empire. They were much more a confederacy of countries, rural states, ruled by a framework of monarchy. Well, I mean, essentially, in that case, then you could definitely make a comparison to at least the Confederacy of States prior to the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, because we were definitely not United States. We definitely didn't have any sort of government. We were just, 13 individual countries that were loosely going to send money and arms if there was ever needed to be a reason. But I don't think you can make a comparison to the Holy Roman Empire either to the Confederacy, because even the Confederacy had a constitutional government that was almost word for word verbatim the same as the federal constitution, except with a more emphasis on states' rights and the preservation of slavery. So you would definitely, at least in the administration, the early period, especially the antebellum period and to the founding of the country, you could definitely make a comparison to the Holy Roman Empire in terms of governmental administration. But post antebellum and post Reconstruction, the comparison I think definitely drops from what you're telling me. Robert says, my ex-girlfriend is a Cambodian American, and she and her family see a lot of similarities to BLM and the modern cultural revolution left in the Khmer Rouge's Year Zero. We all know how that ended. Absolutely right. There is definitely a lot of comparisons and similarities you can definitely make to sort of the social progressivism that we see now to the Khmer Rouge's Year Zero. Although for me lately, it has been more so this comparison, in my view, at least for my time in academia, when I did my undergrad, I always think about the Great Leap Forward from Mao Zedong in China because of his famous phrase, let 1,000 flowers bloom, essentially saying let the academics have their words and let them identify what they take issue with in the current regime. And then Mao would just have all the academics rounded up and then summarily executed and put into camps. So, and we're seeing that now in academia, right? They're like, well, we have these institutions that value freedom of expression and ideas. And then so professors utilize their right to freedom of expression and ideas. And then professors are getting canceled and professors are, having studies retracted because they publish unfavorable results. I mean, for God's sakes, you had the New England Journal of Medicine earlier last week talking about how we shouldn't have sex assigned to children on their birth certificates. It's absolutely insane. It's coming. Pager says, I don't like how fantasy orcs are usually written. Goblins are supposed to be the minions that get killed in droves. Definitely. Although I think my favorite subversion of that belief has been the anime Goblin Slayer, just because it can show how badly a goblin can fuck you up close, especially in close quarters combat. So they can be easily killed in droves, as the Goblin Slayer shows us, but they can still do some pretty nasty damage. And I think fantasy orcs usually get shafted because you either get the sort of stereotypical D&D kind where we are isolationist, but really aggressive warrior people, or a la Klingons, or we're just leave us alone and let us have our backwards beliefs. And usually there's a lot more culture to it. The Elder Scrolls series just has a lot to talk about in terms of orc culture, and they're a great example to use. Conrad says, I bought the Christmas carp today. I despise this fish, but it is tradition. So, okay, is this why carp was trending the other day? I swear I saw everyone and their mother tweeting about carps, and I couldn't understand as to why. So I wonder if that was just like a Christmas thing going around and based off of like a Polish tradition. That, or I'm just, seeing the Dunning-Kruger effect and I'm just seeing things that I shouldn't be seeing. But I've actually not had carp. I've had quite a few things, whether it's sunfish or catfish or bass, but I have not had a carp. Robert Freed says, the Great Leap Forward was a major influence on the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. It should be mentioned, China propped up the Khmer Rouge with 15,000 technicians and military advisors. Yes, they did. The People's Republic of China definitely have a huge hand in the Khmer Rouge. Carp tradition came from the Hilary Mink, a Jewish minister, and one of the early commie governments. Interesting. And it's just stayed around since then. Huh. Who remembers that carp are easy to breed? Oh, okay. Great White Lobster says, Styx was a sick game. Yes, it was. And everyone could afford them. Yeah, if they're easy to breed and you can make plenty of them, then that definitely makes it a tradition, especially if you're living under a communist regime. You don't have to worry about spending rubles or whatever the currency of the time was on it. Smoked carp is good, but fried carp is like eating the bottom of a garbage pail. Well, I have no experience dealing with carp, but as someone who has had his fair share of smoked salmon and other forms of smoked fish, I'm going to agree with you based on experience alone. So in an extremely based PR move, he promised carp for everyone in 1946. Well, if you've got something that breeds like a carp or breeds like a rabbit, that'd be the way to go. See, this stream has just been a fun history lesson. Everyone should benefit from it, where we're getting so much information about Polish tradition and politics. Carp are bottom feeders. Yes, they are, from my understanding of fish. The most carp are bottom feeders. There's so many jokes to make there. I just have to pick one now. Oh. But this has been good so far. I'm glad that you guys decided to come around and stop by and say hello. This has been fun so far. I'm definitely available for another hour or so we can keep it going. But let's see. Let's not take a look at the news and stay off Twitter because I don't want it to necessarily be political today. If the decline of Christianity in the West becomes fully realized by the cultural left, neo-paganism becomes common on the Volkisch New Right to fill the spiritual vacuum by liberalism. Yes, only because we're seeing this weird resurgence of paganistic ideas come out of some like really extreme far right sort of like Wignat types. You get like Odinism, so we're seeing this resurgence of just sort of this Norse mythology come by, as Christianity decreases in the West. Odinism is growing rapidly here, both in the States as well as in other parts of Western Europe, in response to the decrease in Christianity and its presence, which is a shame because if there's neo-paganism is severely cringe. Yes, I agree with you. Neo-paganism is definitely cringe because congratulations, you were going way back. Instead of return to monkey, we're returning to paganism, and to me, that's just as bad. That's pretty, yeah. Great white lobster, question mark. Did you know white lobsters don't turn red when cooked? As someone who has not had a lobster in 15 years, I could not tell you. And so no, I didn't know that. Poles are my people, at least in part, yeah. Varg is very cringe, yes. Pedro says, my fantasy orcs are basically humans who have been twisted with demonic corruption. Essentially, their morality boils down to war, and their violence is essentially the highest moral truth. See, that's cool. I like the idea that these guys have somewhat of a philosophical moral imperative. That's neat. And at least then they have like a reasoned aspect. They're not just dumbed down like big stick goes bonk. That's pretty neat. Okay, whenever you finish writing this, if you get it published by the end of next year, I will buy a copy. I'm so down. Rodmodvery Church in Poland wants to build a temple in Warsaw. Is this a paganistic church? Project looks like a wooden Walmart with a swastika above entrance. Well, let's go. Whoops. Let me go copy that now, because now I want to see what that looks like. Slavic native faith is what Google tells me. Wow, that is... Okay. Yikes, that just does not look good to me. It does look like a wooden Walmart with a swastika above entrance from what I'm seeing here on Google. Huh. Okay, got me something to Google here. Let's take a look here. Let me put a link in the chat so I can show everybody else. Because, yeah, that is one ugly building. Which, to me, this just comes back to the idea of classical Western-style buildings. There is no evidence of Slavs using swastikas with 8 even arms. So just more cultural appropriation, then. Preservatism says right-wing ideas need to be grounded in a religious element outside of Christianity. The only alternative to paganism and folk religion, neo-paganism, can only be astroturfed, though. And it is astroturfed. Like, and I think it's interesting, right, that sort of the neo-paganism sort of comes out of that new agey Wiccan-style stuff of the left in, like, the late 90s, mid-2000s. And then all of a sudden, just, I guess, you have this army of just, I guess, I don't even know if I want to call them right-wingers that just want to own the libs in the most non-conservative, non-right-wing way possible by adopting these non-Christian ideas and then trying to implement them. And of course, most of them are astroturfed. Cringe. I see the photo. Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's definitely cringe in my opinion. And then if you look up sort of these paganistic churches and faiths, if you go to the news section, there's this Vice article from 2018 where it's just like the racists are taking over paganism, and it's just like, well, I mean, I think this is what happens when you take yourself away from sort of a front in the culture war. So the left sort of begins to move away from most, if not all, religiosity. And then, of course, there's going to be a power vacuum. So other forces are going to swoop in. Pedro, going on about his book, says, my orcs hate the Empire because it's not aggressively going to war with everyone around them. They think they could run it better and more efficiently by implementing, I presume, an orcish military-industrial complex? Question mark? That'd be interesting. And then, I did miss this from Robert Fried earlier. Anders Breivik was an Odinist and then blew up the very leftists who dream of a massive decline in the decline of Christianity in Norway. Yeah, I knew that Anders Breivik was an Odinist. He is probably the most famous one of them all, and sort of is the reason why a lot of the neo-pagan movements are associated with quote-unquote right-wing terrorism. Although I wouldn't even say that Breivik himself, well, I mean, he had ideas that were definitely on the right, but I wouldn't want to associate with him, and of course I'll disavow him. Most of your neo-pagans are Nazis, and seizing the means of production is not conservative. Absolutely, National Socialism is not at all conservative, even if they have conservative ideas when it comes to social issues and other questions in regarding to the relations of other peoples. I would not wholesale at all call any aspects of NatSoc right-wing. And I don't care if that's the herder, the National Socialists or the real socialist kind of argument. I don't care. Their administration, their beliefs, and everything are antithetical to what a right-wing government would actually be in practice and in progress, especially when we compare classical definitions of conservatism to how they actually ran the German government at that time. Robert Fried says that Slavic paganistic church looks like a rundown house held together with duct tape. I wholeheartedly agree. It does look very raggedy. It does not look good. It looks like a computer generated image, for God's sakes. It just looks like a render of something that you would see in Civilization or Age of Empires. Definitely not something that is aesthetically pleasing to the eye. And I think that you kind of need that for a house of faith, right? That there needs to be something appeasing or appealing to look to. Like, that's why I find Eastern Orthodox churches so beautiful, because if you step inside, you have these beautiful frescoes and murals of, the saints of Christ and of Mary. And I just find that to be beautiful, because even though you're standing there and you're in service and you're listening to the divine liturgy, you're just surrounded by this presence. And to me, that's just really, it's moving. So, I mean, I think that there needs to be a sense of aesthetics for any sort of religion and any sort of faith, and that is just very gaudy, very ugly. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Pedro. Most neo-pagans are Nazis, and I'm kind of glad that we can easily identify actual Nazis by their religious beliefs, because most of the time they're not Christian. They are definitely some sort of weird paganistic religion. Opinion on Survive the Jive. I have no idea what that is, and that sounds definitely... now I'm gonna have to Google what that means. I really don't want to know. Okay. Is it the historian, Tom Roswell? He has a YouTube channel and a Twitter account. Historian, filmmaker, science communicator, pagan, migration era, Anglo-Saxons, North mythology, and population genetics. Interesting. I do not know enough about him at all, so I would have to do some reading to figure that out. Conrad says the church isn't built and probably won't be for a while. Oh, well, that explains why it looks like a 3D render. Hopefully it doesn't get built, but that's just me is someone who is coming back to his Christian faith to say no to paganism. The Nazi Party formed a coalition government with the Communist Party in order to beat the Conservatives and the Social Democrats. It's almost as if they were socialists. Absolutely. The early formations of the Nazi Party and fascism itself talks about syndicalism. And the only reason why they start sort of having this position of being anti-syndicalist is because, of course, they have to beat the Social Democrats and fight the communists that were violently rampaging in the streets of the Weimar Republic. The Nazi regime also saw the destruction of Christianity as well. The Christian Camp campaign was called 1/3 of all Catholic clergy, and the Third Reich faced some sort of repression by the regime. Yes, they did. That is very true. They were fiercely anti-Catholic. Most of the fascists are, because at the time, historically speaking, the power of the Catholic Church has always been a seat of political power in Western Europe for centuries. So yes, the Nazi regime was very much anti-Catholic and very much wanting to see the destruction of organized religion. And Great White Lobster says he's a YouTuber. Well, I will have to learn more about him because I do not know that much about him at all. Although, looking at his Twitter account, he seems to know his history pretty well, especially about the Norse and the Anglo-Saxons. So I will definitely have to give him a look, and I can definitely give some thoughts on Twitter after watching a few videos. So, do you like his stuff? I mean, I would assume by your suggestion to him that he is someone that you enjoy listening to, or at least are aware of if you're going to recommend him. Robert Fried says, the Eastern Orthodox, thank you for the compliments on our churches. Well, you're quite welcome. As someone who's coming back to his faith, like I grew up in a very Baptist religious household, and then sort of had that edgy teenage atheist libertarian kind of phase. And now that I'm older and I've had several encounters with my own mortality this year. I've told myself I need to get right with the Lord. So I've been growing, looking into religious faiths. I've been listening to what the Catholics have to say. I've been listening to what Baptists have to say, as well as the Eastern Orthodox Church. There's a parished church that's actually part of the system, a short drive away from where I live. So I've been there a few times, and it's a different experience, but I definitely enjoy it. Ludwig Strasse, are you a normie? No, I hope not. I've been reading way too much counter enlightenment and dark enlightenment stuff to call myself one. I definitely was in high school and college. I was definitely your run-of-the-mill Rand Paul supporting libertarian, although now I think my politics have definitely changed in the last year or so, especially when you move from a big city to a rural area. But no, I'm not a normie. How dare you? I live in a historically, in a word I cannot pronounce, Unatia area. Prudentialist. There are downsides to world building for 4 to 5 years. The elves in my setting are in the process of basically having a complete overhaul. My lore from them was from my atheist days. Hey, well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, 4 to 5 years just gives you 4 to 5 years to examine the evolution and finalize your thoughts. That way, when you put pen to paper, you're good to go. And those were Orthodox who turns to Pope in 1569 and kept their liturgy. And they only have one parish left in Poland now. Well, that's certainly depressing. Catholics and Orthodox bros are very bad with theology. Unfortunately, Catholics more than Ortho bros. Well, I mean, as I learn more about theology and church history, I don't really have a fully fleshed out opinion yet. I think that the schism is unfortunate due to a matter of language and iconoclasm based on my understanding of history. But, I mean, at least historically in recent, centuries, there's been more things of them coming together, or at least no longer admonishing one another, which I think is important because I am sort of in the same position as like Aaron McIntyre is, that Christendom still has a political force in Western Europe, well, in the West in general, not just Western Europe. So you kind of want to have them at least on relatively good terms. Is the English word coming from union, I think. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Great White Lobster replied, okay, yes, I think he's important. I think our pagan roots are important. There's an earthy wholesomeness about it. I would suggest that Christianity was very much paganized once the Romans got to it. Yes, there's a lot of paganization of Christian faith and teachings, at least when it comes to the application of holidays and traditions that we enjoy now. I mean, the birth of Christ is definitely not on December 25th. Many biblical historians put it sometime in March or April. So there's definitely been a lot of paganization of Christianity, especially to convert, because I mean, the way that Christianity gets adopted by the Roman Empire is one hell of a tale. Robert Freed says, I am Comanche. My father was Native American church, founded by Quinana Parker, and my mother was nothing. But I was drawn to Eastern Orthodoxy after a period of non-religiosity. Well, that's interesting. Oh, hi, Jonathan Pohl from, I would assume, pole position. Glad to see you here. I'm glad that you said hi. Who voted thumbs down? Well, that's a shame. I haven't even noticed, but it's not going to bother me. I will just like my own video myself to counteract this terrible thumbs down incident. But yeah, well, that's really neat, Robert. I'm kind of in the same position. I had a period of non-religiosity, and I'm coming back to it, especially after everything that's happened to me medically this year. So it has been a fun experience listening and reading more about, the Catholic practices of the church, the Eastern Orthodox, and just good old Southern Baptist religiosity here in the States. The rest of the Union Church turned full Orthodox under the Tsarist pressure, or full Catholic as it's closer to them than Orthodoxy. Oh, and so they're pretty much the remainders of their kind. Pedro says, basically, modern Catholics believe that your salvation through Christ is reset everything, your sin. I'd talk to Middle Minister if you're interested in religious things. Introduce me, and I would love to have a conversation. I'd love to know more. I've been talking with quite a few people in private in my DMs on Twitter about sort of people giving me their best pitches for their respective denomination of Christianity. And Google April 3rd, 33 AD. First things, why we can believe and know the exact date that Jesus died. In our new book, Most Important Week of the Most Important Person Who Ever Lived. The year John's ministry began. The year Jesus' ministry. See, more things I get to look up and learn. Glad I got to, I think I'm too autistic to have legitimate faith. Well, I mean, there was a poll that Emily Nephilim put out on her Twitter account where she was talking about, like, why are you religious? And is whether some people said, I think it was like 50-50 of like genuine belief. And then the other 50-50 of it was, I like the moral framework of it. So even if you don't have legitimate faith, I think that one of the greatest things that Christianity provides is the moral framework for our societies to function. And to me, I think that that's really important. Lots of unions in Ukraine, Romania, Lebanon, and Iraq still. Well, I wouldn't know so much about Iraq, Jonathan, just because of how aspects of non-Islamic faiths are treated, especially in the Middle East, to a point where you get a lot of international relief organizations begrudgingly being like, well, it's actually Christianity and it's, denominations that are under threat. Graphics for April 3rd, 33 AD images. Okay, I see what you mean. Jesus' crucifixion date confirmed. I'm going down the rabbit hole of biblical history. I'm loving it. And the first image I popped up when I look up April 3rd, 33 AD is researcher claims the discovery of Jesus in the stars. And it is this image. Open image in new tab. We're going to download that one. That's definitely interesting. Yeah, the planet position was peculiar. I'm seeing that. I'm going to see if I can link this in the chat for you guys to see. Because, yeah, that's, I mean, if you have faith, right, that can't be a coincidence. Christians are currently colonizing VTubers. I found it on Twitter. It's hilarious and cringe that Christian weebs are at it again. I mean, you got to get with the times if you're going to proselytize your religion. That's just my position. But I mean, you always run the risk of having someone like Hank Hill run up to you and tell you that you're not making Christianity any better. You're just making rock and roll worse. But I mean, if Christians are colonizing VTubers and are telling the weebs that, they need to get right with the Lord, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I mean, hell, the distributist of all people, who is a traditional Catholic, is a big anime fan. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a weeb and praising the good Lord. I think that's totally doable and compatible. But yeah, that planet position image is definitely, yeah, wow. I have no words. There is an outbreak of black Wojaks made by an SJW. Yes, I've been seeing that. It's been all over my damn timeline today. I didn't know where it came from, although I knew that Brick, the Hindu Dindu, has been talking about how there's watermarks on these black Wojak memes that like someone created. Like, you're willing to put your name on this garbage, but that's fine. It's going to be appropriated by edgy right-wing Twitter accounts, and they're going to be just blown the fuck out, and I'm fine with that. Robert Fried says, younger Native Americans despise Christianity due to ethnic studies. I'll admit I wasn't a big fan of the Protestant church to natives, but Eastern Ortho took a different attitude to Alaskan natives. Yes, I could imagine that the history of essentially using religion as a mechanism to sort of make Native American children more anglicized is definitely going to have long-standing historical animosity. I mean, hell, a great modern TV example would be the TV show Hell on Wheels. That would definitely, to me, is a great way of sort of culturally breaking down sort of the animosity between Native Americans and sort of the Protestant faith. There's an outbreak of black Wojaks. Yeah, it's definitely true. But again, they're going to be appropriated by the right, and I'm not going to have a problem with it, because the left can't meme in the way that the right wing memes. The left memes in the way that we say things like diversity is our strength and hands up, don't shoot, and Black Lives Matter. Like, those are left wing memes that are more permeable into the culture because they're politically acceptable, because no one wants to be deemed a racist. So the left wing managed to get its ideas out mimetically in a way that the right can't. The right wing meme is what? Make America great again, or freer the markets, freer the people, but they're not as nearly as widespread as what the left can do, because the left, of course, once you control institutions, it's a lot easier to astroturf your memes and get your ideas out in a mimetic fashion that the people just gobble up, because when your TV shows and your sports people and all the sports ball newscasters are talking about it, you've got to of course, play ball, and you have to play nice, because heaven forbid you get canceled, or heaven forbid you're not at the sensitivity training at your office, because that's a quick way to get fired. So the left-wing meme is far more permeable. Just the right has a way to have really good shit posts online, and that's the real difference between left-wing memes and right-wing memes. Have you considered Unitarian Universalism? Everyone goes to heaven no matter what, including Adolf Hitler and Mao Zedong. All religions are equally right. See, that just sounds like some good place bullshit that it doesn't matter. And maybe that's just because of how I was raised, where, you're entitled to your own beliefs, but, you do what you want, but, you might want to get right with the Lord on your own end. But yeah, I mean, if that's to be believed, right, then that means that Emperor Constantine, who on his deathbed gets baptized, is in heaven. It makes me question whether or not at the end of one's life that, Stalin or Mao or Hitler manages to go upstairs and meet their forgiveness. I would definitely laugh, but you know what? I've got a good 60, hopefully plus years on this earth, and I can find out after I'm gone, and then I'll find you if I'm up there or down there, and then we can have that conversation again. But yeah, so I've learned so much today, from Survive the Jive to Polish politics to the planetary positions on April 3rd, 33 AD. This has been a fun time so far. I'm learning a lot more than I thought. There is a non-zero chance that the world ended on December 21st, 2012, and this is purgatory. It's been a meme going around. Like, has the world really been the same after 2012? And I would say no, because all the woke shit started after Obama got reelected. So maybe we are in purgatory. I'm just making fun of that cringe religion. Yeah, definitely. Stalin could have been a priest if he hadn't dropped out of seminary. Yes, that's very true. Although I think his understanding of how faith worked probably definitely helped him seizing power within the Soviet Union. Thoughts on progressive Christianity? I see a lot of YouTubers who are these types lately. I think that most of them don't mean it. And that's me being cynical, because when someone who is progressive is utilizing the concept of religion to apply an argument, I see two things. I see someone who is either A, having a really existential, teleological, and theological crisis of faith, wondering if their beliefs, which most of the time are counterintuitive and counter to what the scripture and what the Lord actually preaches, is their progressivism going to send them to hell? So, of course, what we must do is that we must reinterpret the faith, and we must reinterpret doctrine and church doctrine to essentially justify my progressive beliefs. But at the same time, I also see this aspect of spite, because, when I hear progressive people utilize God and religion, which are historically always have been sort of this conservative communal bulwark against the ideas of like liberating oneself from tradition or liberating oneself from society, to now use it to justify these things that are inherently Marxist. I think that it's spite. It would be like an atheist trying to invoke God to pursue a progressive policy position, because it's like, well, I don't believe in this, but I'm hoping that your backwards belief will allow you to justify my position. That way I don't have to worry about actually arguing you with the merits of my policy. And to me, that's where it's always been. But we're seeing a lot of these Christianity types that are progressive, especially in areas that I think are predominantly white. Like, you see a lot of progressive churches in areas like Salt Lake City, in places like Seattle and Portland. And I think it's because, historically white people have always been more religious than others, at least, in the cultural mainstay in the United States. And so we have to find a way to maintain our existence and, of course, get that sweet 501c3 cash, because, nonprofits and tax exempt. And what a better way to draw in a crowd than to be accepting and to grow your audience. Progressives will call Jesus anything but the Son of God. You are absolutely right. They'll call him a man. They'll call him a prophet. They'll call, well, not even a prophet, but at least someone with a moral code. And that's where you get a lot of deists, too. A lot of deists were the ancient progressives of their time. I feel like if I'm ever going to be religious, it's going to be some occult shit. Then I would highly recommend that you go check out Styx, Hex, and Hammer's occult video series and his books, because I have a couple of them, and I have them for historical reading, and they are really interesting. Philip Carlson, how would you define yourself theologically or religiously? Well, that's a great question, because I'm actually sort of going back and exploring my faith and exploring the theological questions, because in this year, right, like I've moved back into the ancestral homeland area where I live, and I have grown far more conservative and right-wing in my politics because of it, living in this rural red America, Bible-thumping part of the country, which I've grown to really appreciate. But at the same time, I'm dealing with a medical problem. As I've mentioned in some of my videos, I'm dealing with renal failure, so dialysis, the transplant list, and things like that. And I have been exploring, Catholicism. I've been exploring Eastern Orthodox, and I've been looking into the Baptist churches in my area. And I haven't necessarily picked one, yet that I can say that they speak the most to me, or I've had that moment of conversion, that moment of faith. But I've definitely come back to appreciate Christianity a lot more in my times coming back here. They might call him the Son of God, but never the only way. Absolutely, they probably don't. Migrants are more religious than the population they leave on average, but research, that's why Americans are more religious than Brits. Absolutely. I mean, the Puritans were far more conservative and far more religious than that of the Anglican Church, that had passed religious freedom laws in the country, allowing the Catholics to exist without sort of the state or other populations giving them hell. So they left, partially. That's the reasons why. And that's why Americans are more religious than Brits. Absolutely. But research shows that churches become progressive and eventually decline. That gives me hope. But at the same time, with any aspect of being progressive, you have to understand that the establishment powers that be, the cathedral of however you want to call it, will always astroturf them. That is why there will always be like a million NPR articles about progressive churches or pastors that are trans or, priests that are opening to LGBT weddings. Even if they don't last, they will be astroturfed and they will be artificially kept alive on some sort of political life support courtesy of the establishment media. Philip Carlson says, do you have any pastors that you listen to? I've got some suggestions. I don't have any pastors that I listen to. I am thankful enough that I'm in an area where I can still go to church and listen to pastors and fathers in person. But if you have suggestions, I'm definitely down to receive them. I would love to hear your suggestions. And yeah, Conrad, you're absolutely right. Migrants are more religious than the population they leave on average. In fact, there was a great article from the Pew Research Center that came out a couple of weeks ago that was talking about American Latinos and how Hispanic Americans are becoming less Catholic, but they're becoming more evangelical Christian. So it's definitely there. The Puritans have left their roots in the Northeast. Massachusetts liberals are socially conservative on a lot of things. I believe that. I'm not from that area. I haven't been to Boston or any other parts of Massachusetts, but I can definitely buy that argument that the Puritan roots still have a long-standing impact on the culture, especially up there, even if they are socially liberal or fiscally liberal. I would imagine that there's still a vast strain of social conservatism in the area. Although, to me, I think Massachusetts, I think a lot of Irish Catholics for some reason. Maybe that's just due to the Kennedys. I don't know. But yeah, Philip, hit me up with your suggestions. I'm all for it. I'm all for learning more. So the Mayan calendar was kind of right. It's the end of the world as we know it with the beginning of this woke shit. Yeah. I'm definitely up there with Dave in the distributist, where just after 2012, things just hit the fan and the accelerationism got really turned on. And it makes sense, right? Like Obama gets reelected. You get that white paper talking about the emerging Democratic majority due to demographic shifts. Democrats are supposed to have this electoral majority from now ad infinitum. And just the woke stuff accelerates. Obama becomes a lot more authoritarian with his executive orders, trying to bypass Congress on everything from community college, climate change, and immigration. And it's been nonstop with this attitude of contempt. Democrats in 2004 at least had more civility for Republicans than I have with any Democrat that I talk to now in recent memory. How long till pedophilia in the church will be a marketing slogan instead of weapons against the church? Well, give it 5 years. I guarantee you, because the more that we see this minor attracted person map BS get pushed, it will eventually happen. And there's a great Stone Toss comic where it was like, back then, gays in the church, oh no. And it's like present day, gays in the church, come on in. So you'll definitely see it. So I'd imagine that give it 5 or 10 years, it'll definitely be a slogan, especially in more progressive, socially liberal parts of the United States and other parts that have been, unfortunately, enveloped and dwarfed by globo homo. John Piper is my favorite. He makes faith real and practical. And Charles Spurge. Well, I'm going to write these names down, Philip, and I will give them a listen. That sounds great. Irish Catholics, most of the state is Eastern Orthodox, Methodist, and Baptist. Oh, again, I'm not from the area, so I wouldn't know. Charles Spurgeon, but he lived in the 1800s. Oh, well, if his writings are still available, I'd happily give them a read. In Poland, Minister Sasson spent 70 million in the elections. That didn't happen. Sasson is now a unit of measure in meme circles. In terms of spending, 70 million and not getting anywhere in the elections, I could definitely see that being a meme. Preservatism says, I'm a Pentecostal. Personally, we are sort of seen as kooks, but I think that mostly has to do with a lack of good leadership. I do not know much about the Pentecost and Pentecostals. I would have to do some reading. Do you have an organized church structure? I'd imagine that you guys probably do if you're complaining about a lack of good leadership. But yes, to those who are new or just tuning in, welcome to the Prudentialist Bible Hour, where I get to learn all about different forms of Christian faith and get to learn more about pastors and preachers and all that sort of jazz. So if you're interested in Christianity, come on down. here we are. But no, I'm glad that you all could stop by. This has been great for the last hour and a half. Because I had mentioned on Twitter that I will have a video premiering tomorrow that's talking about the parasocial relationship. Because if you're locked down or you live in a state where you can't really get out and see your family, or just all that undue hardship like what's going on in the UK and other parts of Europe, and so many people, get told to stay indoors, and where do they have to go? They have to go online. And I mean, I think it's been really bad, especially for young men. But, at the same time, me being one of those young men who's enjoying the parasocial relationship, because for me, it's family, seeing medical people and going to dialysis. I don't really have room for a social life because they're like, well, you're an at-risk person, so don't get COVID. It's definitely insane. But at the same time, it has its benefits. But I think it's important that we reinforce actually interacting face to face with people. I mean, if you can do it, please do. I think it's way more healthier than just putting all of your personality and social circle eggs in the online basket. I mean, it's never wrong. I would love to get to know you guys more and make friends. But at the same time, like, you got to enjoy your in-person relationships, and definitely, if you have the opportunity, be closer with your family, be closer with your parents. It can never go wrong with that. Robert Freed. So Global Homo uses a scandal in the church to bring about a crisis of faith and religious decline, but then seeks the normalization of pedophilia. Crazy. Yes. And also the greatest trick that Global Homo ever pulled off was essentially deflecting the whole gays or pedophiles argument and then putting it back onto the church. And while the church definitely has its fair share of kitty diddlers, don't get me wrong, the amount of child grooming that we've seen in the last 40 some odd years within gay rights circles is insane. Normalization of pedophilia was always going to be an end goal. That's why we had to start with all these other aspects of the alphabet soup of the community, quote unquote, and that's where we're at. Did you know that 14% of Unitarian Universalists are Republicans? Also, the religion is super fucking white. 89% of Unitarian Universalists are white. So I would imagine that it's sort of like the white progressive argument of like, I'm not like really spiritual, or I'm not Christian, but I have faith, that kind of deal. Conrad says, government tried to ban people from leaving for New Year's Eve, but it's non-constitutional, and even the prime minister acknowledged it. Well, at least there's respect for the rule of law in your country. I live now in a place where my right to vote doesn't mean shit. And I'm glad that I live in Texas, where at least the economy wasn't shut down for a very long time, where I can still go out and about. But even then, my governor has been gotten so much flack from the right wing of his party about just having the statewide mask order, where all the businesses will kick you out for not wearing one. But even then, a lot of stores don't fucking enforce it, because I went Christmas shopping yesterday, last minute, and half the people in that Walmart were either wearing their masks wrong or weren't really wearing anything at all. So, I mean, the enforcing of these kind of laws are just ridiculous. Oh, we don't, XD. Oh no, we don't, in terms of like, we don't respect the rule of law, or you don't have that. Prudentialist, notice how the kitty diddling parts of the church are the liberal parts of it. Just curious. I don't know, because I mean, a lot of it comes from the Catholic Church, and I mean, demographically speaking, most Catholics vote Democrat, but I wouldn't necessarily make it a political issue. I think it more has to do with that you have an institution that incentivizes hiding and getting away with it, especially for decades. I don't know if it's necessarily political, but I'm more leaning towards it. Yeah, it's definitely a progressive problem, but it's not like but keep in mind, it's not like the right wing doesn't have its fair share of hypocrites either. I mean, the media will be happy to tell you anytime that a moral majority Republican comes out as gay, or, Dan Crenshaw likes a $15,000 an hour stripper, or $1,500 an hour stripper in New York on his Twitter account. So, I mean, it's insane. The vast majority of COVID restrictions are illegal. We should have went into national emergency, but that would have meant the govs had to pay businesses back for shutting them down. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for a fiscal disaster, especially if you want to just go deficit spending and all that jazz. I can see why they wouldn't have done that. Robert Freed says, do you think the elites are really going to seriously push this great reset in the name of fighting the virus and climate change? Will lockdowns continue into the indefinite future? It depends on how future elections go, especially when you have, Bill Gates and others saying that we won't return to normal until 2022. You've got Klaus Schwab and others of the Davos World Economic Forum pushing for that. It's all about high time preferences. So this great reset, right? We've had for the last 20 years, since Al Gore onward, the ever increasing high time preference of we have to act now about climate change. And don't get me wrong, there are actual environmental problems that we have in this world. I think that we're ignoring we put too much attention on the man-made one because that can be regulated by the government, of course. We're not talking about vast cracks in the earth that have methane, natural gas, and port carbon gas into the atmosphere that causes problems. We're not talking about the problems of plastics and, islands of trash that are in the ocean. That's why I'm a really big supporter of the ocean cleanup project by that 22-year-old kid who's doing all that stuff. But yeah, they're going to push for it because the left has spent time and time again making the virus, or systemic racism, and climate change all of these high time preference issues that require them to act. So it spurs and galvanizes the base to go out and vote and make the action and make the call to action to implement these policies, and your base will eat it up. And then you add on the concept of bio-Leninism. Yeah, I mean, these useful idiots will definitely be loyal to the system that got them in power in the first place. Preservatism says Pentecostalism essentially started with the Azusa Street revival in the early 20th century. If you want to know the gist of Pentecostalism, start there. I said I will definitely do that, and I'll probably at you on Twitter about what I think about it. You've spoken about the importance of engaging in real and local politics. I just wanted to say that I took that to heart, and I'm looking for a party to join. It's not easy knowing what party to join. From Sweden, by the way. But I know what I want, what I believe, but no party feels like what I stand for. Well, Philip, what I can tell you is that, if the parties that are currently out there don't seem to represent you, that there's no shame in taking the necessary steps to fill out the paperwork and engage locally. And you don't even need to think about running for, your parliament, a local city council or something in that small area. Those jobs really matter in terms of local communities. Jonathan Pohl says systemic racism ceased in the U.S. in 1964. Legally speaking, you are absolutely right. And now we are dealing with, I think, we have to invent new kinds of discrimination because we have the narrative of the country, right? So Mencius Moldbug talks about like the one-story state or the two-story state in his more recent essays. And, we had this existing narrative in the United States of, America's founding against tyranny, and we had this, these agrarian farmers who struck out west, and we made the United States what it is. It's not perfect, but we are here in order to form a more perfect union, to where now the narrative has been replaced with the narrative of civil rights. And we're seeing that now with systemic racism. Like, we must fulfill that that mantle of responsibility of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And while fundamentally ignoring what made Martin Luther King Jr. rather successful through invitational rhetoric and garnering, the majority population of the time to buy into his cause. But we're seeing the inverse of that now. Now it's far more retribution and more revenge oriented. But yeah, so we have to create new issues. That's why we have terms like systemic racism, because even though systemically there's nothing on the books that would allow it to happen, they have to come up with new terms, and we have to come up with ways in order to regulate and police thought and action. And that's where we're at. Chris Raposo says, I wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas. Really enjoying your content. Keep up the good work, and I wish you all the best for 2021. Well, Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I wish all of you guys a Merry Christmas. It has been a lot of fun talking to you all. I've been watching content creators and political YouTubers for years. I think a lot of people get started with Sargon, and he got me through college just listening to other people, and I got exposed to Academic Agent, and then I got exposed to The Distributist and Charlemagne and all these other cool people like Don the Pleb and Jonathan Pohl. So it's been a blessing to meet you guys and to actually start making content. So I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Don't check the air pollution maps for Poland. I won't, Conrad. It's okay. I will have my based and red-pilled meme image of what Poland is, and I won't look it up. So basically, Robert Fried says, post-November 2020, we are now in an oligarchical progressive dictatorship of this great reset and the war mentality on COVID. Wonderful. Well, I would argue that we've been dealing with sort of this oligarchical progressive dictatorship for a while. Not to go full NRX on you, but like, there's a reason why the concept of the cathedral has been so widespread now. And even like normie right-wing circles, they won't call it that. They'll call it the establishment, or they'll call it something else. But the power structure that Curtis Yarvin talks about is definitely there. So, I mean, is there a way to fight it? Yes. I think that localism is going to be the best way forward, because if you have a decentralized network of communities and towns where we don't necessarily have to talk to each other, but if we can maintain our communities, it's going to be a lot harder for them to come up with a strategy of one size fits all on all of us when there's 150,000 different local communities that are fighting back. I don't care if Dan Crenshaw follows a stripper on Twitter. Jesus hung out with prostitutes. That said, he's a rhino, so attack him for doing it. Yep, that's what they're going to do. I think that the Democrats know that for a lot of Republicans, the whole, this moral, family values Republican likes a Twitter, or like a stripper on Twitter, so they have to play nice. Whereas really Dan Crenshaw should be just like, fuck it, I was a Navy SEAL. Like, we talk shit about women all the time. Like, yeah, I'm going to like a beautiful woman. But of course, he's not going to do that. Also, where you should be going to strippers and hookers and try to convince them of the based Christian conservatism all must be reached out to. As long as we are disgusted by their existence, the left will own them. Same thing with furries, ANCAPs, and the terrible grifting gun girls. I wholeheartedly agree with you, because the more disgusting a person is, whether it's their personality, whether it's how they behave, the more the left loves them, and that's where we're at. And so, yes, I used to hate the idea of proselytizing one's faith in one's beliefs, but I mean that's what I'm doing with this YouTube channel, right? Is I'm proselytizing my political views, my understanding and analysis of history, and how the world should function, right? Or how my country should respond to things like foreign policy, which is my big sort of wonky, autistic thing that I love talking about, is like foreign politics and realpolitik and how the United States should engage. So, yeah, I'm all for us talking and reaching out. That's why I like what Don the Pleb does so much, because he's willing to network and go out in person. And once my at-home peritoneal dialysis starts, I'll be able to actually do more rallies and things like that in person. I plan on starting a book club and do more public forums in my local community and get more young men politically engaged. Conrad says you could fit over 63,000 Liechtenstein-sized countries in Europe. Just saying. Yeah, and that's where you get that weird sort of patchwork cameralism argument again, where it's just like, yeah, like that's the ticket to world peace, is that we just have, 63,000 Liechtenstein-sized countries in Europe, and we'll all just get along because we can go to our respective Liechtenstein that, fits our beliefs and fits our style of governance. But I mean, I like the idea of cameralism and its patchwork aspect that people talk about, but I mean, my response is that there's too much international order and also ethnic issues that take place that would make that a bit difficult to accomplish. Pedro Garcia says proselytizing hookers is very effective when they're 30. Yeah, it's very easy to tell people who've hit the wall that, there is a better way to live your life, and it's usually with the good Lord. Do you have a favorite book? Looking for something politically related to read. Been reading some Machiavelli and enjoying it, but Conquering and Keeping Land isn't exactly applicable today. Machiavelli is The Prince is very applicable today because it's sort of the basis of modern statecraft, but it's also Conquering and Keeping Land is actually, you don't need to think about it in terms of physical land, but you also need to think about it as an ideological land, because the aspect of most modern statecraft, right, is the creation of, these spheres of influence that allow you to exert and maintain power. So online spheres of influence, as well as academic and other spheres, there's different kinds of lands that you can conquer and keep. It's not actual physical borders and territory. To me, it's also, communal spaces, governmental spaces, academic and office spaces. There are definitely places that you can go. Cameralism will work in space, though. Just fly away from the commies. Yeah. But then you run into sort of like the problem that gets brought up in the great fictional work, The Expanse. And then it becomes a control of resources and power. And it'll be very hard when certain areas have access to territory or access to resources that the other doesn't. You're going to, again, encounter the same problem that we're seeing here on Earth, that the preservatism and I talked about earlier today about access to rare earth minerals like cobalt and such. But Philip Carlson, do you have a favorite book? I do have a few favorites that I could recommend to you. I would highly recommend, if you want a good political read, How Many is Too Many by Philip Carfuro. I'm going to put that down in the chat here. And How Many is Too Many is about a progressive argument for reducing immigration. That was a recent book that I bought and I've been reading, and I've been thoroughly enjoying it because I'm listening from a leftist perspective, arguments for reducing immigration into my country. And it's interesting because they're pretty much essentially climate change, social and cultural cohesion, and education spending, and then talking about the job market, that you're actually going to be making these people's lives that worse. So they're talking about immigrants that are already in the United States. You're just going to flood the labor market. Prudentialist says the wall only exists if you're a shitty person with nothing to offer someone, but your body, tons of women in their 40s get married. Just don't be vindictive bitch ladies. Yes, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. And but I mean, I also refer to the wall in terms of your ability to have kids, because it's a lot harder after 35 to have children. So, and that's where we see the sort of the wall happening now for a lot of, urbanite lefty journalists that are like, why am I the only one who's still single out of all my friends? And it's like, well, everyone else settled down, got married, and had children, and you didn't. Conrad says, if we were thrown into paradise right now, we would dismantle it within 4 generations. Yeah, wasn't it Vladimir Lenin that said, Lenin or Stalin that said, "Give me your 4-year-olds, and I'll have a socialist state in a generation"? That's what I feel like. The wall is MGTOW cope. I agree with you in terms that the whole men going their own way movement just seems to not really want to engage in relationships at all, and they're so very skeptical of women. But I mean, the wall is real, biologically speaking, and it does have an impact. Sargon's talked about it at great lengths as a family man, saying that having kids is important. Thanks, Jack. I'm 25 today. I'm happy to be alive. And yeah, Philip, it's a really good read. And you can get it for cheap online if you're an ebook reader. I got mine from a used copy on Amazon. I paid like $4 for it. But it's a thick read. It's over 150 pages. It's pretty sizable in what it talks about in terms of policy. I was really impressed by the book itself. I would also, of course, recommend all of Thomas Sowell's work, Basic Economics and then Application of Advanced Economics, Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. I'm just going to go through some of the basics, But the book that really got me interested in politics, and especially foreign policy, is The Next 100 Years by George Friedman. Now, George Friedman, of course, is your stereotypical neoconservative policy think piece type that sort of talks about traditional ways of foreign policies conducted prior to Trump. But he made a lot of predictions about the 2020s and the 2010s that I thought were very prescient. And it got me into geopolitics and looking at history and the economies and how we do that. And it's a really good book, The Next 100 Years by George Friedman. It came out in 2009 is when it was written, but it was a hell of a tale. It's definitely good. The average American is financially secure enough to have kids at 39. It is a huge problem. Yeah, and to me, that's my problem, right? Is that I'm 25, and I mean, unless you come from a privileged background or you got lucky finding an ability to be financially stable, the ability to have kids and to settle down and to have a house and all the things that your parents and grandparents had is really hard. And not gonna lie, it's demoralizing. Like if you see Settlers Lament, and he tweets, and I don't know how much of it's serious and how much of it's sarcastic, where he talks about not being married and he's black-pilled again. But like, it's a very real feeling for people my age, and I try my best to hopefully find that person. My goal is that once I get a new kidney and all that jazz happens, that I'll be able to focus on a career and focus on finding the right person for me. I fathered a child just before turning 40. Wow, Jonathan, I'm happy that you have a family. That's awesome. I'm always happy to see that people are married and have kids and things like that. That just makes me happy to see. It brings this it's the baby fever talking. That's what it's got to be. That's what it is. Pedro says, also, we need to get rid of like the $30,000 requirement required for adopting kids. That way upper middle class liberals aren't the only ones who can adopt. Yes, I think that there's a lot of problems with how the adoption industry here in the United States works. I don't like the fact that we have these agencies that essentially make a racket out of well-being. Conrad says, with a voice as high-pitched as Settlers, I would be black-pilled as well. Yeah, but I mean, I have the same problem, I guess. Doppelmark on Twitter, I don't know if any of you follow him, but he messages me all the time every time I put a video out. He's just like, your voice, you need to lower it, you need to turn up the bass or something like that, you need to work on it. What you're talking about is too important for you to sound so young. So yeah, I can definitely relate to Settler's Lament's position with his voice. Don't worry, I sound like Michael Cera when I listen to my recordings, and it makes me hate editing videos because I have to listen to myself talk. Robert Freed says, I read The Next 100 Years and The Next 10 Years in high school. Good books, both of them. Yeah, they're really good books. I would also recommend Foreign Policy Begins at Home. And I think that's by, oh goodness, I think it's Jonathan Cass. No, Richard N. Haas, that's who it is. Richard N. Haas wrote in 2014, Foreign Policy Begins at Home. And he talks about that the best way for America to have a stronger foreign relationship is to take care of its domestic issues. So it's talking about the debt, it's talking about immigration, it's talking about manufacturing. And ironically enough, a lot of the things that Haas talks about gets bombastically focused on by the Trump campaign in 2016, despite the fact that Richard Haas is the Council of Foreign Relations president and hates everything that Trump does, despite writing a book in 2014 to, pretty much emphasize the exact same policy positions the Trump campaign did. Jonathan Pohl says smoking will make your voice more masculine. Yes, but I am too much of a health nut to do that, although I do have the occasional cigar socially. I definitely enjoyed the hell out of that in college, going to social clubs and dealing with the world of debate where everyone who was competitive was a smoker. So I got into it, but then the girl I was dating at the time was not happy with the fact that we lived together and I was a smoker, so she made me quit. But I do miss it. Don't get me wrong. I know the health threats are there and the risks are associated with it, but I do enjoy a good cigar. Something I definitely enjoyed. But yeah, oh, maybe one of these days I'm just going to have to tinker with my recording setup and just see what I can do about my voice. But I'm probably not going to mess with it. I really don't care. If the sound of my voice is an issue and you can't seem to focus on the content of what I'm talking about, then, maybe this isn't the channel for you. But hopefully you can enjoy what I talk about and we can go over things. And even if you don't like the sound of my voice, you can at least enjoy what I have to say. That's my position on it. But yeah, I'm right there with you, though, going back through chat now. I agree, Pedro, that the adoption system does need to be reformed. Oh, we need to turn it into a right-wing voting farm. We need to be ruthless. Lower the barrier to entry of adopting foreign babies. The religious right will do the rest. Yes, but at the same time, my counter to that would be, why can't we just create incentives for people to make it easier to actually get married and have children? Don't get me wrong. I mean, if there are suffering children out there, I would love it if good people can adopt them and take care of them, because no child should suffer. But I think that we need to be reforming the economy in such a way that it is easier for people our age, Pedro, to, if we are to find the right woman, to get married, have kids, and be financially secure to where we can afford to have large families, because that's the kind of way that you create right-wing large voting bases. But unfortunately, the economy is so stratified by sort of this neoliberal establishment that it's almost impossible to do that. And that's really my biggest problem. Robert Freed says, I grew up most of my life in foster care. The foster care system, CPS, and the adoption industry is highly corrupt. CPS and foster care in particular are evil institutions almost in themselves. Yes. So during undergrad, I worked for a family law attorney, and I worked guardian ad litem cases, and I worked with CASA, so court-appointed special advocates. And I cannot begin to tell you how terrible those systems are. They're so bad for the kids, and it breaks my heart. And it really broke me from wanting to actually pursue a career in law. I studied history and politics. I was going to go to law school, and I woke up doing this stuff day in and day out. I was an office manager for a law firm, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I didn't want to go to law school. And ironically enough, I started finding my passion in charity work, and I worked with a children's charity, and we did food programs. And I realized that this was the better way to actually help these kids than it was, I think, to a great degree working within those systems, because they are corrupt and the laws just do not favor the children, let alone people who actually want to adopt them. Conrad says unlimited migration for single childless women age 18 to 30, and white women will build a mile tall white wall with their bare hands. Yeah, I would guarantee it that you want to make single white women be anti-immigration, give them competition. So Chad is going to start picking the nice brown lady that just immigrated next door than her. Studying history is a good way to be poor for decades on end. Yes, in the way that you're going to watch virtually everyone ignore history, and you will be poor and just sit there and watch it go by you. But I also studied history as a passion because part of me at one point wanted to write books and write texts on history. And while that may not be the most lucrative way to make money, it's been a passion of mine. I've had a few ideas I wanted to do. I have a biography or two that I've had partially written that I've wanted to get back to. Pedro says the idea is that we do both. I'm all for doing both. I would like that easier to make it easier to have your own kids, while it is easier to adopt them. The plan is to min-max. That's true. Min-maxing strats, baby. This is an RPG now. Robert Freed says foster children have higher PTSD rates than veterans of the Second Iraq War. A lot of people do not know that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There have been a lot of studies that talked about PTSD in foster families and those who deal with the family law system. It's pretty bad. Studying history also makes any film with swords in it unwatchable. Yes. It's very true. But at the same time, I kind of have to turn my brain off when I'm watching historically set movies, because I love the movie Master and the Commander, and I love Kingdom of Heaven. And I know that they're not the most historically accurate films. And I've studied quite a bit of part of the Crusades and other parts of the Napoleonic history era. And I'm just like, well, I got to turn my brain off before I start nitpicking everything. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Conrad. Oh, cool. You majored in history too. Yeah, so did I. I double majored in history and political science with a focus on international relations and law. Loved it. I was planning to go to law school this whole time, and I just woke up one day absolutely miserable. I couldn't do it anymore. And I found a passion in the nonprofit work that I do now, but I have plans to do other things as well. I'd love to get into the local media and broadcasting, and that's partially why I do this, as a passion to get my opinions out there. But one day I hope to make this a small side hustle. That's the dream, right? Is to make this a side hustle. Philip Carlson says, if you had to move to another country, not in the English-speaking world, where would you move to? So it would probably be between Japan or Austria. Austria, because I used to go there often as a kid growing up when I lived overseas, and I think that the country is beautiful. And then Japan, because I have a strong appreciation for their history, although I would be treated as an outsider, no doubt. I wouldn't mind being an American expat living in Japan and just appreciating the culture and the people there and just the work ethic. Pedro says it's easy to justify getting rid of the $30,000 payment for adopting a kid. Just say it disproportionately affects Black women who want to be a mother, and also compare it to purchasing slaves. Yep, I definitely think that would be the way to go. If you're going to make that argument, you have to frame it in a progressive lens. That's sort of the only way to get conservative policy on board with the normies, it seems. I think Don the Pleb's very right on that aspect. Weeb. The funny thing is that I'm not. I don't watch anime. I don't read any manga or anything. My best friend has been trying since like my sophomore year of high school to get into anime, and I've never had the ability to. Is Austria German Canada or Canada English Austria? Oof. That's a good question. I don't know. I like to think that the Austrians can just happily blame their problems on the Germans because, the most infamous Austrian in the world just happened to take over Germany. Kundun is my favorite film. It's about the Dalai Lama and the leadership exile from Tibet when the Chinese invaded and massively repressed the Tibetan peoples and their religious faith. I have not seen that movie, but I will add that to my list of films to watch. I'll have to give it a watch and let you know. See, my plan was, and I know that like this is a channel of like what 240 some odd subscribers, and there's 15 of you all here watching. But like I am thinking about doing sort of a weekly like quick take or like movie review kind of deal where I just turn on the microphone and we just talk about a movie that we watched. Does that sound like something that you guys would be interested? So if I said like, "Hey guys, I'm gonna go watch Kundun over like the holidays, and sometime after New Year's, I'm just gonna come on stream and we're gonna talk about it." Would that be something that you guys are interested in? Because I think that the plan would be like prudent quick takes or prudent observations, and just be a live stream on films and things that we either read or see. And Philip says yes, then cool. I'll probably do it. We'll start doing that after the holidays, because after the holidays I'll be doing dialysis at home. I'll have my machine, so I'll have more time in my day to actually write scripts and make time to watch these kind of movies and go over these things, because I've written a lot of stuff down that we've talked about on today's stream so far. So it's been fun. I'm definitely down to do it. More content, the better. Experiment. All right, then cool. We will do a weekly movie or book review kind of deal, and we'll start that sometime in January. Sounds like a good idea. I'm always down to experiment, because I like the scripted stuff that I do, but it's more fun, in my opinion, to do things extemporaneously, because I'm used to talking out of my ass. I did impromptu competitively for college speech and debate, so this will be fun. I'm looking forward to it. That'll be great. I'm glad that you guys said yes. So, it has been a fun time so far, and I have been enjoying this conversation. It's been great. But let's take a look at what's going on. I'm going to just briefly scroll through Twitter and see if there's anything interesting that it's fun bringing up. And if not, then we can keep chatting about anything else. Let's see here. Oh, did anyone see that really cringy tweet by Julia Wolf, where she was talking about dear 2020 journalist, you are stronger than you know. If I had told you in January you would produce from home, track from your closet, master Zoom, anchor from your living room this year, you would have laughed and then cried. But here you are, focusing on facts, seeking truth, and sharing stories, wearing your masks, bathed in hand sanitizer, doing your job, a job that some people hate you for doing. They were loud in 2020, but you were strong. You were strong enough to battle the isolation, the fear, the unknown, strong enough to ask the tough, soul-searching questions, not just in our interviews, but in our newsrooms, strong enough to ask for help, because we all need it in 2020. If you're a journalist at the end of 2020, you are strong. Stay strong, because what you do matters. 2020 proved that. Thank you, and Merry Christmas. You've earned it. Can we talk about just this cringy class of journalism? There was a point in time. Yeah, don't make me laugh. They were never seeking the facts. There was a point in time where they did. If you want to go back to the era of muckrakers, of the Teddy Roosevelt era, like those are genuine issues. But oh well. I mean, that would be nice if we could go back and actually have meaningful journalism happen. But no, what happens to meaningful journalists? They either get executed, or they stop being journalists, or they get imprisoned. That's what happens with the Panama Papers. That's what happens with Julian Assange, and that's where we're at. And it's a shame. Couldn't read the full letter fully. Too much cringe. Absolutely, it is cringy. That's why I had to. I'll do the reading for you, so you don't have to suffer. Conrad says, if I have to move out of parents' house, I'm thinking about starting a channel about Polish politics with an NRX twist. Yes, by all means. I mean, I'm not an NRX person myself, although I've been reading a ton of Unqualified Reservations and Spandrel and Nick Land. I like reading and seeing what people like Charlemagne and the Distributist have to say. I disagree with the idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but yeah, liberalism and democracy do have valid criticisms that I think need to be addressed. Jonathan Pohl says, I've lived overseas for 15 years, 3 years in London, 3 years in Bishkek, 6 years in Accra, and 3 years in Suleimani. You are far more well-traveled than I am, and I grew up in a military household, and I got to live all over Europe. You could definitely have some stories to talk about then there, Jonathan. That sounds awesome. Cringe. Obama arrested more journalists than any other administration, but Trump merely insults journalists and complains about how he's an autocratic president while Obama is a liberal democratic president. Yep. It is cringe. But I mean, Obama was our guy. A man that just seemed to be made out of this test tube to communicate with the media, the democratic version of Ronald Reagan. Although, ironically, Obama's sort of being thrown under the bus politically for not being woke enough, while at the same time also being rehabilitated by the media as Biden is meant to assume the throne. It's kind of interesting to see it all take place, this sort of double think. Michael Nocter says, the only meaningful journalists are ones who take real risks like Assange and the like. Even Glenn Greenwald is more of a real journalist than all of CNN. Absolutely. I mean, Glenn Greenwald has at least his spine, and at least he has his scruples, because he BTFO'd The Intercept for not wanting to talk about Hunter Biden. Despite the fact that Glenn Greenwald is, an adamant progressive. I probably would disagree with Greenwald on a majority of political issues, but I have a lot of respect for him because at least he's got his morals and he has his convictions and he sticks with them. I mean, there's not a lot of journalists like that anymore. I would argue that Peter Hitchens is, but even then, Peter Hitchens isn't too much of a journalist as he is a columnist. But still, I definitely agree with you there, Michael. If you take real risk, then I would consider you a journalist. Pager says we should proselytize journalists, start with low-level neoliberal journalists who write for local papers. Inspiring philosophy-style proselytation is very effective on liberals. It can be. The issue is that with a lot of local papers, they are usually bought out by conglomerates. So like when I lived in El Paso, the El Paso Times used to be its independent newspaper before it was bought out by the USA Today network. So now it's a part of this giant corporate conglomerate. So you would really have to struggle to find local newspapers that aren't being eaten up by like Sinclair Broadcasting Group or Gray Media or something like that. However, I think that you can translate that proselytation effort towards places like Substack, Medium, and of course the online blood sports, and do it in person. But I mean, it's going to be very hard to do when that philosophy aspect of itself is owned by such giant corporate conglomerates. Preservatism says, I see NRX as a needed reminder of the unfortunate facts that the founders of our republic were aware of what they were doing when they were creating it. Oh, yes and no, preservatism. And the only reason why I say that is because a lot of the problems that democracy has were adequately identified by the founders. And if you were to go through Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, a lot of those issues are addressed. The problem is that we have a judiciary, right, where judicial review was not originally intended within the Constitution and is created in a political power play in Marbury versus Madison in 1804. And from there, the courts now have this ability to invent rights and invent laws that do not exist. And so that's why you see a lot of mainstream conservatives talk about the importance of originalism and textualism. Because the courts have some of the biggest unprecedented power, to where an unelected federal judge can pretty much tell us that, deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, is federal law of the land, despite it never being an actual law, and it being founded on the process of prosecutorial discretion, which even then is more of an invented right of the prosecution and of the judicial system than it ever was, and, English common law, and that's where we're at. So it's not that the founders were aware of these problems. I mean, they were, and I'm sure they had safeguards for it. But when you have a judiciary whose power has been expanded to where it is now, it's very hard to keep a track on the problems that they adequately identified that comes with democratic systems. That's why originally the Constitution was so indirect democracy. You had, of course, the Electoral College. You had the state legislatures appointing the senators and voting them in. It wasn't about what the popular vote. I mean, women didn't have the vote, and the universal male suffrage at one point in time was mainly based on the ownership of land. That's what I'm saying. Culturally, we had forgotten why democracy stuck. NRX is reminding us. Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. And I'm kind of glad that we're seeing a lot of the neo-reactionary crowds' critiques of democracy coming into the mainstream, because it is an imperfect system. And I think, as the distributist pointed out, is that you have these three major problems with democracy that democracy seductively fools us into believing that if we just vote ourselves and keep voting, we can fix these problems that are inherent to the system. I just don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Philip Carlson says, have you heard of Jonathan Pye? Any opinions? I've heard of the name, but I do not know enough about him to have an opinion. I know that he is a reporter, and he's done stuff with Russia Today on RT, but I do not know enough about him to have an opinion. I just know that he's got quite a bit of prominence. Inspiring Philosophy got a bunch of lefties on TED Talks to get all into conservative Christianity. My question always becomes is just how sincere they are. Conrad says, we've had so many Epstein cases in Poland in the 90s, we coined the term serial suicide. Epstein is suicide, not diddling. Ah, okay. Well, that's concerning. Too many people getting, Epsteined. What I'm saying is that, yeah, NRX is reminding us. Yeah, definitely. It is reminding us. Those issues are definitely there. Michael Nocter says, virtuous republicanism based on the independency of the landed gentry was the goal of the founders. Sadly, that has fallen by the wayside. Yeah, absolutely. It has fallen by the wayside. I'm reactionary in the sense that I would love to go back to like 18th and 19th century federalism. And I think that would be a really great way to get people back to, you want to convince urbanites that are like abolish the electoral college, to tell them that 99% of most urbanites' problems with politics is that their problems politically can be solved at the local and state level. But we seem to blame those evil Republicans that take the White House every other election, which to me is ironic because the Republicans never hold any real institutional power. So, if we were to go back to its own federalism, decentralized states, state legislatures focusing on state priorities, you would definitely see people put a lot more interest in their local issues and have their political problems solved. And we could probably all get along, even if we lived in 50 distinct little democracies, because that's what federalism was originally supposed to be, this experimental aspect of democratic institutions all working in different directions. But, I mean, sadly, I don't think that that's going to happen. And I am right there with Conrad. Russia is its own civilization. It is neither European, it is neither Western, nor is it Eastern. It is distinctly its own thing. 99 ruble coffee is a lot better chain than Starbucks. I've never had 99 ruble coffee, but I would guarantee you that anything is better than Starbucks. I cannot stand that garbage. Ever heard of J-Reg? He makes excellent political satire. Can't recommend him enough. Absolutely. I love J-Reg. J-Reg is great. I also really enjoy Value Select. They aren't necessarily political humor, but they do sketch comedy and musical songs and skits, and I think they're hilarious. Value Select has got one that J-Reg really likes, talking about cancel culture, and his solution was just bring back the duel. And it's a really funny, like, minute and a half ditty. It's just really entertaining. I like J-Reg a lot. Philip Carlson, he's great. Thoughts of Biden administration policy on China. So we've already seen, I actually talked about this today on Twitter, is that I think that the Chinese had pretty much told the Biden administration over a phone call that the United States should re-enter the JCPOA and just go back into the Iran nuclear deal. And you had Henry Kissinger tell the incoming Biden administration to be go easy on China. So, I mean, what will probably happen, right? If Biden gets into office and all these legal challenges just don't work, is that you will see a trade renegotiation from the Trump administration that essentially is going to try and go back to the Obama era. You will probably see a renegotiation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, so the United States is in it. And you will see the United States go back into the Paris Climate Accords. And you will see pretty much the Chinese win in the way that we want them to, because there's no way that there's no way that a Biden administration is going to be tough on the Chinese in regards to like its Confucius centers infiltrating and subverting American colleges. It's going to be difficult. We will see China step up its grounds on the soft power and institutional exertion of power, and it will continue to do that through its means of controlling natural resource markets and expanding its sphere of influence in the South China Sea, especially with its regional neighbors in trade areas, and will challenge the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is the U.S. trade, group and policy board sort of association, and that's where we're at. Jonathan, if you really want to get some of that Chinese money, there are two ways to do it. One, start working with a Confucius Center in a local American college or university. Or two, open up a mining company in sub-Saharan Africa and start, digging for bauxite, cobalt, and other rare earth minerals, and you will get that Chinese money real fast. He also claimed that Germans are the most Byzantine culture in Europe. Felix Condensi. I've heard of that name before. I'm pretty sure I read some of his work in my history classes. Yeah, he did talk about that. Virgin coffee versus Chad tea. Yeah, what about the guys who drink both? What about that, Conrad? Just curious. I definitely drink both. I'm a staunch Earl Grey fan, and I'd take my coffee black. Starbucks is good if you want coffee cheap. They expect you to put a bunch of crap in your coffee and get their money that way. Black coffee there is about as cheap, if not cheaper, than McDonald's coffee. Yes, but I am a snob, and I make my coffee at home, and I also own a French press, so I just avoid most places that sell me coffee unless I'm, downtown or I'm something like that, just enjoying the day. Michael Nocter says, if Trump fails, he will be remembered like Julian the Apostate, the last gasp of a gone past struggling against inevitable globalism. I sincerely hope I'm wrong. Well, I hope so too. It's just that I don't want that to happen, in part because the New York Times and every other media institution has made it abundantly clear that that's exactly what this is. When they're talking about that Trump is like the last gasp of white America and the last gasp of Republicans in the United States. You're absolutely right. He will definitely be remembered like Julian the Apostate. That is a very, very good example. Robert Freed says, so the U.S. under Biden will increasingly resemble Russia during the Yeltsin era. Yeltsin sold out Russian assets and pride to the West. Biden will do the same for America and China. Yeah, pretty much. That is a spot-on comparison. You will see that. And I mean, that's sort of been the central theme, though, of this Obama and Biden sort of political dichotomy, has just always been this managed, easy decline into American retirement on the world stage. Like, we can't maintain it anymore. And I mean, Trump was just this giant orange dick that said, yes, we can. 99 rubles is only $1.30. Oh, that's not bad. But I'm going to have to look up 99 rubles coffee, and I wonder if I can order. Oh, prices for food? Okay, that's not a brand. I'm a dumbass. Are you currently in Russia, Jonathan? If we talk about the Yeltsin era, both Poland and Russia got their economic transformations designed by Jeffrey Sachs. Yes, and pretty much allowed the current oligarchical structure that we see in a lot of Eastern former Soviet republics to be the way that it is. What will China do to the LGBT community once they rule the West? So, Robert, I don't know how familiar you are with like bio-Leninism, but essentially they will be used as useful idiots, and they will use America's social divides, especially on these social issues, like they have been doing. That's why you see a lot of Chinese state media accounts talk about things like LGBT rights and systemic racism to just culturally poke and prod at the United States and its social tensions. The Chinese will use it to secure their ends. And they will definitely use it to secure more political power in the United States. But as soon as they accomplish their political power, right, they'll be thrown under the bus. And they will be put in their place, just in the same way that virtually all aspects of degeneracy was crushed under Stalin. It's the nature of how these authoritarian communist regimes operate. And I wish I'm in Southern California right now. Oh, Jonathan, I wish I could throw some money your way and get you out of there. I'm so sorry that you're in Southern California. I'm so sorry that you're dealing with, comrade Gavin Newsom and his terrible, terrible policies. If only you could get out of there. But yeah, that's probably what would happen, is the same thing that we've seen historically, is that other marginalized groups will replace them, and cannibalize their movement in order to make room for their new stuff. I hope Biden isn't a Yeltsin type. Vladimir Putin is a piece of shit tyrant. I don't want that in America. Well, I mean, if you want to adhere to some sort of cyclical view of history, I mean, the whole, good times create weak men create hard times, and hard times create, strong men. So, I mean, whether or not that happens here is entirely up to what happens in the next couple of weeks. Poland was ruled by different mob groups in the 90s, but they killed themselves often enough for the state to put them in their place. Organized crime is doing VAT carousels these times. So VAT carousel, so values added taxes. So money laundering and tax evasion, is that how they're making their money these days? It's probably a lot easier than being violent and trying to whack the other guy. And thanks for subscribing, Michael. I greatly appreciate it. Cincinnatus was pretty rad. Absolutely. And that's kind of why I love all these like conserva MAGA boomers that are just like, I'll lay my life down for Trump. And I'm like, oh God, we've turned Trump into the American Cincinnatus, and here we are. Robert Freed says, do you think with the Great Reset, we will be pressured into giving up basic luxuries we currently enjoy, like meat consumption and car ownership? Yes. I have held the position for years that every young man who is under 30 needs to learn automotive skills and training, because once self-driving cars become a thing, they will do everything they can to outlaw personal car ownership. It's coming. I guarantee it. They will do everything they can to make public transportation possible, and they will do everything they can to make personal car ownership here in the United States all but illegal. It's going to happen. You're essentially the song Red Barchetta by Rush is going to be a reality. Strong men do not necessarily create good times. Absolutely. They don't. Sometimes they make things even worse. We can see that anytime that strong men take office. We see it with authoritarianism. Hopefully, however, we don't have that problem. I'm not giving up meat, not now, not ever. Amen, brother. I love steak and eggs and meat and all those sort of proteins way too much. Any favorite period in history and why that period? That's a really good question. I have a few periods that I find really interesting. I really find the first 4 major Arab caliphates really interesting. So, I mean, Prophet Muhammad dies in 632 AD, and within 100 years, you have the entire Middle East conquered, Turkey conquered, North Africa conquered, and you're pretty much on the doorstep of Christendom in the Pyrenees Mountains in 732 when he's stopped by Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours. I think that period of history is just amazing to see this rapid conquest and essentially assimilation and usually domination and subversion of peoples into this empire that would, now be a mainstay in the Middle East in modern times, both culturally and historically and religiously. That's definitely a huge period of history that is interesting to me. I also really like the period of revolutions in 1848, Philip. I think it's interesting that, one after another, like a tinderbox going aflame, just all these revolutions happening in Western Europe, more or less over the same issues and over economic problems and cultural and ethnic divisions, leading towards these concepts of liberalism. Those are really interesting periods of history to me. I could go on and on about that kind of time frame. They're really fun areas to study, and I do take a great interest in ancient Islam, because a lot of the things that ancient Islam accomplishes, both technologically, historically, politically, we're still dealing with today. Muhammad was an antichrist. I mean, if we want to have that conversation, I'm again, like I said earlier, not too well versed in my theology to really have that conversation. It is a heresy. Well, I mean, yes, I agree with you. Ironically, they talk more about Jesus than we do in the New Testament. Conrad says, you set up a network of fake companies and trade regular goods while you pocket the VAT tax of 23%. Wow, that's a pretty lucrative deal you got there. Is political violence getting worse in the Biden era? The media is spurting out about neo-Nazism, but will we see significant left-wing terror attacks? We're going to see the rioting's not going to stop, and the Antifa stuff's not going to stop, because Biden has established himself as going to be your standard bearer, neoliberal, corporate Democrat type. So, I mean, left-wing violence is still going to stay the same. But you have to understand that the right right-wing violence that they talk about. The left controls all major institutions and levers of power: the media, academics, colleges, all of it, and all aspects of the civil service and law enforcement, and with district attorneys and the like. So even though they control every lever of power, you have to be you have to create a boogeyman to keep the perpetual revolution doing. So what do? We talk about right-wing violence. We talk about neo-Nazis. We talk about right-wing extremism. And that's why we always talk about where we're at when it comes to right-wing violence and terror. So while, yes, there are right-wing terrorists and they should be dealt with in the same way that left-wing terrorists should be dealt with, the left will always prioritize its media attention on right-wing terrorism because it allows them to perpetually say that we're the victim and that's why you should vote for us. So political violence will inevitably get worse, and we will probably see some kind of like Waco-style scenario in order to have a show of force. But I mean, keep in mind, a lot of these things too are going to be caused by glow-in-the-darks, like the documents that came out from the court, hearings about the group of guys that wanted to kidnap Governor Whitmer in Michigan. Half of them were informants from the FBI, getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to be informants. So, I mean, you got to do your research and you got to be, just got to keep a keen eye on it. Too hard to study handwritten archival documents. Much easier to be a 20th century guy. Absolutely true, Jonathan. I did a lot of my undergraduate thesis on the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and reading handwritten documents from, 18th century political statesmen and politicians was difficult, to say the least. Thank goodness it's in English, so I can get, digital transcriptions and all that. So it helps. But yeah, reading archival documents are incredibly difficult. I went to the Gutenberg Museum as a teenager when I lived overseas, and just seeing all these ancient texts that were put on printing presses, even then, were almost impossible to read. Did you watch Radlib's stream on the Dark Age Industrial Revolution? It is on my watch later list. I have not yet watched it. I love Radical Liberation. I'm so glad that Academic Agent had him on. I think he's a really great guy, and he's incredibly smart. The only thing that will cause a surge net and Wignats and neo-Nazis is reparations. Well, I mean, the whole identity politics thing is going to cause the surge in Wignats and neo-Nazis. And that's exactly what they want. When the supply doesn't meet the demand for racism from the left, they have to invent more racists. And what a better way to do that than to do things that would actually radicalize people? That's what they want. Do you know how Islam made it all the way to Indonesia? Because I've got no clue. I'm not exactly familiar either. That would make for a really good stream to talk about it. I might make that a history stream and sort of do what AA does with his cigar streams and unpopular opinions, and just go on a political question like that one and make it a little lecture and say this is what the research tells me. Conrad says 3D guns are cheap and easy to produce enough, even if lefties could do it. So some overzealot could do it, probably LARPing as a right winger. Yes and no. But, yeah, Jonathan has the answer there. By boat, Arab and Persian traders. But that would be a fun thing to do, is just to do like a book review or a history question stream and just do the research. And Jonathan, if you're a study or a student of history and do things like that, I mean, I would love to go on and talk history with you one of these days. That sounds like a fun time. But Conrad, I mean, yes, it could be done, but at the same time, 3D guns as they currently exist right now, they're not very durable. But I mean, we'll see legislation trying to crack down on 3D printed weapons anyways. It's bound to happen eventually. Robert Fried says, Mettenreich held back much of the radical left in the 19th century Europe, largely because it embittered memories of the French Revolution, which violently overthrew the church and throne. Yes, Charlemagne has this book about a guide to traditional living, which I think was published in like 1908, which said that the French Revolution was one of the greatest like tragedies of the modern era, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I taught history at the university level for 12 years. Wow. Well, then yeah, one of these days, Jonathan, I would love to go on and talk history with you. You just sound incredibly well read and well versed. I would love to be on stream and pick a topic and talk with you. But yeah, Michael, I studied the convention for my senior thesis in undergrad. When I was in college, I was much more of a diehard civic nationalist. I love the Constitution, love me Philadelphia Convention, and and I do, because I think that there's a lot of I still hold to the traditional American narrative that these people did a great thing and created a great thing. I mean, it's flawed by all means, but I mean, I hold reverence to it, I think, as a patriotic American, so I definitely have those views. Robert Freed says, I heard that many of those Wolverine Watchmen were informants. I personally don't think those guys could have pulled off such a plot given those guys who were not informant backgrounds. Yeah, I don't think so either. But I mean, again, when you have institutions that need to create right-wing extremists and need to create, the boogeymen, politically speaking, I mean, of course, that's why Fed posting is such a meme on Twitter. It's why we talk about glow-in-the-darks online, both on videos and on other social media. Like, it's a real thing. So yeah, I definitely don't think they could have pulled it off with those who weren't informants. But I mean, when those people were getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to essentially get these yokels arrested, I mean, it happens quite often. I mean, Razor Fist has a really good example in one of his gun rant videos that where talks about the Viper militia in Arizona, which was pretty much the exact same thing. Michael says, my argument is that the American Revolution was an exercise in virtue ethics and not individual liberalism. I would love to read your argument on that. That actually is pretty interesting. Because that's actually a really valid argument. Google the FGC-9 trailer. 3D printed hybrid guns are perfectly viable. All right, well, the gun nut in me is excited that they're viable. It just makes me want to go buy a 3D printer now. But yeah, I mean, if they're viable, then they're probably going to crack down and definitely going to have legislation in place. I mean, keep in mind, Joe Biden here in the United States is one of the most adamant anti-gun politicians in recent memory. And I mean, working with Beto O'Rourke, I would imagine that they'll crack down on 3D printed guns and hybrid parts as well. Yeah, Robert, I mean, one of these days I would, I mean, if you follow me on Twitter at 2bprudential, you can always shoot me a DM there, or you can email me at theprudentialist1@gmail.com, and we can schedule a time to stream and talk about a historical subject. But yeah, I mean, I know that they're making advances in 3D printed guns and hybrid parts, Conrad. It's inevitable. But again, I think it just becomes, how do you crack down on that? Because to me, the way that you would do it is that you would crack down on access to information pathways of 3D blueprints and then make it really expensive in supplies. Oh, watch the trailer. It is just less than 2 minutes. Okay, well, we can do that. FGC-9 trailer. So yeah, I'm watching it now. Holy crap. Well, I'm definitely on a watch list for watching this now. Yep, those are viable. Holy cow. Okay, well, I'm sure the ATF will be knocking on my door any one of these days. They make 75% of guns easy. Yeah. So can we expect the FBI to use more entrapments in the future? Definitely. They're already going after 80% guns. They'll definitely go after 3D printed next. Yep, that law would be unenforceable. Yeah, Michael, they're definitely going to be unenforceable, but I mean, it's going to happen. Pedro, I'm a right-wing extremist, but of the freedom variety. I want you to be a free and wholesome Christian. I wonder what the left thinks of me. I mean, as Don has said, that anyone to the right of Mao, they're all the same. We all get the bullet, so it doesn't matter whether you're a liberal, a Christian, a a right winger, an integralist, or we're all hated. But yeah, that was holy crap. That was definitely one hell of a trailer. I mean, short and to the point, because anyone can make them. Blueprints are out there. If you weren't already on a watch list, are you even living? Amen, Dal Huck. I mean, the amount of books I've ordered off Amazon that are criticisms of liberal democracy and, things like that, I'm probably already on a watch list, but I don't care. Pedro says, the second that Biden gets into office, we'll just start sending letters to each of our county sheriffs telling them they'll be primaried if they enforce Joe's new gun laws. Oh, probably. I mean, look at what happened in Virginia, where half the state turned into a sanctuary city for guns. It'll happen. It'll be fine. But, well, ladies and gents, it is 5 o'clock somewhere, and it's 5 o'clock for me. I want to thank you all for coming out. I'm probably going to wind the stream down and have dinner with the family, because it is my birthday. I've been with you guys for 2.5 hours now, and it's been a lot of fun. I definitely enjoy live streaming. I'm probably going to do more of it. It's been great. But I've learned a lot. I've actually wrote a lot of things down in front of me. I have a little notepad next to my coffee mug, and I'll be doing some research. Learned a lot about Polish politics. Jonathan Pole, I'm really glad that you stopped by. I've heard a lot about your show. It's called Pole Position, right? So would love to talk with you sometime and be on your show. But thank you all for making my birthday enjoyable. It has been a lot of fun. And after the holidays, we'll probably do a weekly live stream on a book or something culturally related, like a movie or something. So to all of you, thank you for stopping by. You made my birthday all that more special. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas. If you can, please spend the holidays with your families. Do everything that you can to be with them and enjoy it. Thank you for making my 25th birthday a good time. I appreciated it so very much. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I'll have a video out hopefully tomorrow afternoon. And until then, I'll see you guys around. Bye, everyone.